The marriage ended at breakfast. Alara Vance sat across from her husband in the frozen dining hall of Iron Ridge Manor, her hands folded in her lap like a woman at prayer. But she wasn't praying. She was calculating. Lord Cedric Hale hadn't looked at her once in the 6 minutes since he'd sat down. His eyes remained on the correspondence beside his plate. Land deeds, investment reports, things that mattered. She knew what was coming before he said it. You learn to read silence when you've lived in it for 3 years. This arrangement has proven unproductive, Cedric said, his voice flat as winter stone. I'm dissolving the marriage. You'll leave by week's end. Alara's heartbeat didn't spike. It slowed. Beneath the table, her hand moved to her abdomen, still flat, still secret. She was 8 weeks pregnant with his child, his heir, the very thing he was casting her out for not providing. She could have told him, should have maybe. Instead, she said, I understand. And just like that, she began planning her disappearance. If you want to see how far this story goes, where a discarded wife becomes the most powerful woman in 3 counties, stay with me till the end. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. Let's see how far Alara's journey reaches. The decision to say nothing about the pregnancy wasn't mercy, it was strategy. Alara stood at the window of her quarters 3 hours after the breakfast that ended her marriage, watching sleet batter the leaded glass. Her rooms were in the east wing, furthest from Cedric's chambers, furthest from the parts of Iron Ridge Manor that mattered. She'd been placed here deliberately when she'd arrived as a bride. More light for your sewing, Cedric's mother had said, which was aristocratic code for out of the way. She'd never been good at sewing. The child inside her was barely real yet, more concept than creature. But Alara had learned early that information was currency, and some currencies you didn't spend until you understood their full value. Telling Cedric about the pregnancy now would trap her in a different way. He'd keep her, certainly. Install her back in her role like a piece of furniture returned to its proper corner. The marriage would continue, hollow as before, except now she'd be watched, managed, reduced to a vessel. No, better to vanish. Better to let him think he'd made the decision, that he'd been the architect of this ending. Men like Cedric needed to believe they were in control. It made them sloppy. Miss Alara? She turned. Her lady's maid Bess stood in the doorway, wringing her hands in that nervous way she had. Bess was 17, prone to tears, and the only person in this house who'd shown Alara anything resembling kindness. Lord Hale's man came by, Bess said quietly. Said to start packing your things. They want you gone by Thursday. 3 days. They weren't wasting time. Then we'd better start, Alara said. Bess's eyes went glassy. I'm so sorry, miss. It's not right what they're doing. Everyone knows you've been... What? Alara's voice came out sharper than intended. What does everyone know, Bess? The girl flinched. Just that you've tried. That you've been a good wife. Alara almost laughed. A good wife? What a strange, bloodless phrase. She'd been punctual, polite, decorative when required. She'd mastered the art of being present without taking up space. She'd learned which conversations to join and which to avoid, had memorized the names of Cedric's business associates and their wives, had worn the right colors to the right dinners. She'd done everything except the one thing that mattered, produce an heir. 3 years of effort, 3 years of monthly disappointments that Cedric's mother tracked like a merchant counting losses. 3 years of doctors with cold hands and colder diagnoses, all variations on the same theme. Give it time. These things happen when the woman is anxious. Try to relax, as if you could relax under that kind of scrutiny. Help me pack the practical things first, Alara said. Warm clothes, nothing decorative. Bess blinked. But miss, won't you need your gowns? For wherever you're going? Where I'm going, Bess, gowns won't matter. Trot. Alara had one ally in this house, though she'd never met her face to face. Her aunt, Margot Vance, lived 4 days' travel north in a countryside estate that polite society considered exile. Margot had committed the twin sins of never marrying and speaking her mind in public, both unforgivable for a woman of her class. She'd been quietly shuffled away from the family's London holdings decades ago and had apparently spent the years since running a moderately successful scholarly press out of her manor house. They'd corresponded sporadically over the years. Alara's letters had been careful, full of pleasantries and weather observations. Margot's responses had been sharp and strange, full of tangents about manuscript restoration and philosophical arguments Alara only half understood. But there'd been something else in those letters, a kind of knowing. as if Margot could read the things Alara didn't write. The last letter had arrived 2 weeks ago. Alara retrieved it now from the locked drawer in her writing desk. My dear girl, you write about the gardens as if they matter. They don't. You ask about my health as if you care. You might. But what you really want to know is whether there's a place for you here if things collapse. There is. No questions asked. No explanations required. The estate is called Thornfield Rise. Ghastly name. I didn't choose it. The roads are terrible this time of year, but the library is warm and there's always work to be done. Come if you need to. Don't if you don't. MV. Alara had read it a dozen times, looking for hidden meanings or conditions. But Margot didn't deal in subtext. If she said no questions asked, she meant it. The real question was whether Alara could reach her. Iron Ridge Manor sat in the south of Halfordshire, surrounded by profitable farmland and connected to civilization by well-maintained roads. Thornfield Rise was north, past the industrial cities, into territories where winter came early and stayed late, 4 days by coach under normal circumstances. Longer now, with the roads iced over. Longer still for a woman traveling alone. And then there was the money problem. Alara had her dowry, or rather, she'd brought a dowry when she married, but dowries didn't stay with the wife. They merged into the husband's holdings, became part of his estate. Legally, Alara owned nothing. The clothes she wore, the hairpins in her drawer, even the letters from Margot. Technically, all Cedric's property. But laws were one thing, reality was another. Over the past 3 years, Alara had developed a small, private habit. Whenever she'd attended dinners or social functions with Cedric, she'd been given a modest allowance for incidentals. Gloves, calling cards, small gifts for hostesses. She'd spent some of it, saved most. The coins had accumulated in a hat box at the back of her wardrobe, behind the summer shoes she never wore. She counted it now, 23 pounds, 7 shillings. Not enough to live on for long, but enough to disappear. Miss? Bess appeared again, carrying an armload of linens. Should I pack your jewelry? Alara hesitated. The jewelry was valuable. Gifts from Cedric's family meant to display the Hale wealth at public events. Heavy necklaces, ornate brooches, things that screamed status. If she took them, she could sell them. Live comfortably for months, maybe years. But they'd also notice. And they'd come looking. Leave it, Alara said. Pack only what I came with. Which was almost nothing. She'd arrived at Iron Ridge with a single trunk of personal belongings. Everything else had been provided, or imposed, by the Hale family. She could leave the same way she'd come. Light. Unencumbered. Free. The hard part wasn't planning the escape. It was surviving the days before it. Cedric avoided her completely, which was a mercy. But his mother did not. Lady Constance Hale descended on Alara's chambers the next morning like winter fog, cold, pervasive, impossible to ignore. I trust you're being practical about this, Constance said, inspecting Alara's half-packed trunk with the air of someone examining a servant's work. Alara kept folding. I'm taking only what's mine. Very little, then. Constance's mouth twitched in something that might have been a smile on a warmer woman. You do understand this is for the best. Cedric needs a wife who can fulfill her duties. You've had ample time. 3 years. Ample time. As if producing a child were a matter of scheduling, like organizing a dinner party. I understand, Alara said evenly. Do you? Constance stepped closer. I wonder. You've always been rather opaque, difficult to read. I never knew if you were being demure or simply dull. Alara's hands stilled on the fabric she was folding. She looked up, met Constance's eyes directly for perhaps the first time in 3 years. Does it matter which? She asked. Constance's expression sharpened. For a moment something flickered there. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. Then it was gone, replaced by the usual aristocratic blankness. I suppose it doesn't, Constance said. You'll be gone soon enough either way. She left without another word, and Alara went back to packing. But her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. She pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing it was there. The secret. The leverage she wasn't using. Good, she whispered to the empty room. Let them think I'm dull. Let them think I'm defeated. People who underestimated you gave you room to move. The night before her planned departure, Alara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in her nightdress, watching the grounds of Iron Ridge Manor under moonlight. The estate was beautiful in its way, all clean lines and manicured gardens, everything precisely maintained. Nothing wild, nothing unexpected. She'd hated it from the first day. Her marriage had been arranged, of course. Most were, in their circles. Alara's father had died when she was 16, leaving debts that her mother couldn't manage. The Vance name still carried weight, but weight without money was just burden. Cedric had needed a wife with the right bloodline. Alara had needed financial security for her mother. The arrangement had made sense on paper. No one had asked if they'd make sense together. She remembered the wedding, a cold December ceremony, everything white and formal. Cedric had been handsome in that distant, sculptural way of aristocratic men. He'd said his vows clearly, kissed her precisely once. They'd spent their wedding night in separate rooms because he'd had business correspondence to attend to. She'd told herself it would get better, that they'd grow into affection, or at least partnership. 3 years later, she knew, some gaps don't close. They just become permanent features of the landscape. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, expecting Bess. But it was Cedric. He stood in her doorway, still dressed for dinner, though it was past midnight. He looked tired, not physically, but in some deeper way, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "I wanted to—" He stopped, started again. "This isn't personal, Alara." She almost laughed. What about a marriage could possibly be more personal? "I know," she said instead. "You've been—" He searched for words. "Adequate. As a wife. This isn't a reflection on your character." Adequate. The word hung in the air between them like frost. "I appreciate that," Alara said, and meant it in the most hollow way possible. Cedric shifted his weight, uncomfortable now. "Where will you go?" "I have family in the north." "They'll take you in?" "Yes." He nodded, visibly relieved. This was what he'd come for. Absolution. Confirmation that she'd be fine, that he wasn't really abandoning her, that this ending was civilized and mutual and nobody's fault. "Good," he said. "That's good." They stood in silence for a moment. Alara wondered if he'd ever actually looked at her before. Really looked. She didn't think so. She'd been a role to him from the start. Wife, potential mother, piece of the estate's future. Never quite a person. And now she was pregnant with his child, and he had no idea, and she felt absolutely nothing about his ignorance except a grim satisfaction. "I should let you rest," Cedric said finally. "The coach leaves early." "Yes." He turned to go, then paused. "I hope, wherever you end up, I hope you find what you're looking for." Alara smiled, thin and precise. "I hope the same for you, Lord Hale." He left. She listened to his footsteps recede down the corridor, counting them like a countdown. When the sound faded completely, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. One more day, one more performance. Then she could stop being Lady Alara Hale and figure out who Alara Vance was supposed to be. The departure was efficient, as everything at Iron Ridge Manor was efficient. The coach arrived at dawn. Bess helped load Alara's single trunk while trying not to cry. The household staff gathered to see her off, a small audience for a small exit. Alara wore her plainest traveling dress, dark blue wool that wouldn't show dirt. Her hair was pinned simply. No jewelry except her mother's locket, the one thing she'd brought to this marriage that mattered. Cedric didn't appear. Neither did Constance. The butler handled the formalities, checking paperwork and confirming destinations with the driver. "You're sure about the route, miss?" the driver asked, peering at the address she'd given. "That's rough country this time of year." "I'm sure." "Right then. We'll make Milford by nightfall if the weather holds. After that," he shrugged. "We'll see." Alara climbed into the coach, settled onto the worn leather seat. Through the window, she could see Iron Ridge Manor in the gray morning light. All its towers and perfect proportions, everything solid and permanent and utterly indifferent to her leaving. She didn't feel sad. That surprised her. She'd expected something, grief maybe, or fear, but all she felt was a strange, light sensation, like walking out of a room that had been too small for too long. The coach lurched forward. Bess waved, tears streaming. Alara waved back, then turned to face forward. North, toward Margot and Thornfield Rise and whatever came after, toward the unknown. The first day of travel was unremarkable. They followed well-maintained roads through familiar territory, stopping at coaching inns that Alara had passed through before. She kept to herself, ate simple meals, spoke only when necessary, just another minor gentlewoman relocating. Nothing memorable. But on the second day, they crossed into different country. The roads narrowed. The settlements grew smaller, farther apart. The landscape turned harder. Rocky hills, sparse trees bent by constant wind. They passed through mining territories, the air thick with coal dust, children with blackened faces watching the coach pass with hollow eyes. Alara had never seen poverty like this. Not real poverty. The kind that ground people down until there was nothing soft left. She thought about this child growing inside her. What kind of world was she bringing it into? What kind of mother would she be? She'd never held a baby, never changed a nappy or soothed a crying infant. She knew nothing about raising children except what not to do. Don't be distant, don't be cold, don't measure love in duties performed. But that was just knowing what not to do. It didn't tell her what to do instead. Rough stretch ahead, the driver called down during a stop to change horses. Storm's moving in. Might have to shelter overnight in Grasmere. Not much there, but better than being caught on the road. Alara nodded. Whatever you think best. The driver studied her. You running from something, miss? Or toward something? The question caught her off guard. Does it matter? Might do. People running from things tend to look back. People running toward things keep their eyes forward. He shrugged. Just an observation. Forward then, Alara said. Definitely forward. He grinned, gap-toothed and genuine. Good for you, miss. The storm hit that night while they were still 2 hours from Grasmere. Not snow, sleet, the kind that froze everything it touched. The road turned to glass. The horses struggled, their hooves sliding. The driver cursed steadily, fighting to keep them on course. Then the coach wheel hit something, a rock, a frozen rut. Alara never knew what. But the impact threw her against the side panel, hard enough to knock the breath out of her lungs. The coach tilted, swayed, tilted further, and stopped, listing at a dangerous angle. Everyone all right? The driver shouted. Alara tested her limbs. Nothing broken, but her abdomen cramped, a sharp pain that made her gasp. She pressed her hands there, heart racing. Not now, please, not now. The pain eased, lingered, faded to a dull ache. Miss? The driver's face appeared at the window. You hurt? I'm fine, she lied. We're stuck, wheels in a ditch. I'll need to unhitch the horses, try to pull us out. But in this weather, he shook his head. Might be morning before we can move safely. What's the alternative? There's a shepherd's shelter about a quarter-mile back. Saw it as we passed. Stone building. Should be empty this time of year. We could wait out the storm there, a quarter-mile, in freezing sleet, while possibly miscarrying. Let's go, Alara said. The walk was brutal. The cold went through her wool cloak like it was paper. Sleet stung her face, made her eyes water. The driver walked ahead with a lantern, calling back directions. Alara followed, counting steps because it gave her something to focus on besides the cramping in her abdomen and the voice in her head whispering, You're losing it. You're losing the baby. This is punishment for not telling Cedric. She told the voice to shut up and kept walking. The shelter appeared through the sleet. A squat stone building with a slate roof, one door hanging crooked on its hinges. The driver shouldered it open. Inside was darkness, the smell of damp wool and old fires. Not much, the driver said, but it's dry. I'll see about a fire. Alara sank onto a bench that lined one wall, hands still pressed to her stomach. The cramping had eased during the walk, but she didn't trust it. Miscarriages didn't announce themselves neatly. They happened in pieces over hours or days. You could lose something without knowing it was gone. The driver got a fire going in the crude hearth. More smoke than heat at first, but eventually it caught. Orange light filled the space, revealing stone walls covered in scratched names and dates. Shepherds marking their stays. Some of the dates went back decades. You sure you're all right, miss? The driver asked. You look pale. Just tired. Here. He handed her a flask. Brandy. For medicinal purposes. Alara hesitated. She'd heard conflicting things about alcohol during pregnancy, but she was cold to her bones, and the cramping was returning, and she needed something to steady her nerves. She took a small sip, then another. Warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, she said. They sat in silence for a while, listening to sleet hammer the roof. The driver pulled out a piece of bread and hard cheese, offered to share. Alara ate mechanically, not tasting anything. Can I ask you something, miss? The driver said eventually. You can ask. Why north? This time of year, anyone with sense heads south. But you're going the opposite direction, and you don't seem particularly happy about it. Alara considered her answer. I'm going where I have family. Family you want to see, or family you have to see? Despite everything, she smiled. Somewhere in between. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I've got family like that. Love them, mostly. But spending more than 3 days under the same roof, and we start looking for reasons to murder each other. How long did your marriage last? Alara heard herself ask. The driver laughed, surprised. 15 years and counting. How'd you know I was married? You have the look. What look's that? Like you've learned when to stop talking. He laughed harder. That's the truest thing I've heard all month. Yes, miss. 15 years has taught me when to shut my mouth and nod. Best skill a married man can have. The cramping had stopped. Alara's hands relaxed slightly against her abdomen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she'd just been jostled by the accident, nothing more. Maybe the baby was fine, clinging to existence despite everything. Maybe. You got children? She asked. 4. 3 girls and a boy. The girls are easy. They listen to their mother. The boy, he shook his head, grinning. He's 8 years old and already smarter than me. Scary, that is. Having a child who can out-argue you before he's tall enough to reach the top shelf. Do you worry about them? Every day of my life, miss. Every single day. He poked at the fire, sending up sparks. But that's the job, isn't it? Being a parent. You worry, you try your best, and you hope they turn out all right despite your mistakes. Alara absorbed this. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her about children. Not the romanticized version she'd heard from Cedric's mother, all about duty and legacy. Not the medical version from doctors, all about biology and failure. Just the simple truth. You worried, you tried, you hoped. I think I'm going to be terrible at it, she said quietly. The driver looked at her, really looked, the way Cedric never had. Pregnant? He asked, not unkindly. Alara nodded. Does the father know? No. He whistled low. That's a story. It is. You gonna tell him? No. He considered this. Your business, miss, but children, they have a way of making themselves known. Can't hide them forever. I don't plan to hide the child, just the father's involvement. Fair enough. He settled back against the wall. For what it's worth, you don't strike me as the terrible type, scared maybe. But scared parents usually try harder. It's the confident ones you've got to watch out for. They stayed in the shelter until dawn, taking turns sleeping while the other kept the fire going. The storm blew itself out by first light, leaving everything coated in ice. The world outside looked crystalline and dangerous. They made it back to the coach. The wheel was damaged but functional. By midday, they'd reached Grassmere, barely a village, just a cluster of buildings around a crossroads. The driver arranged repairs while Alara waited in a dim tavern, drinking weak tea and watching locals come and go. She felt different, not physically. The cramping hadn't returned, and she chose to believe that meant the baby was safe. But something had shifted during the long night in the shepherd's shelter. Some decision had solidified. She was doing this, actually doing it, leaving her marriage, raising this child alone, building a life from nothing. And she was terrified. But she was moving forward anyway. They reached Thornfield Rise on the 4th day, late afternoon, under skies the color of old pewter. The estate wasn't what Alara had expected. She'd pictured something modest but genteel, a scaled-down version of Iron Ridge Manor, perhaps. What she found instead was a rambling stone house that looked like it had grown organically over centuries, wings and additions jutting out at odd angles. The grounds were wild, gardens gone to seed, trees pressing close to the walls. It looked like a place where society's rules didn't quite reach. The coach stopped at the front entrance, a heavy oak door with iron fittings slightly ajar. Alara climbed down, legs stiff from days of travel. The driver unloaded her trunk. You sure about this, miss? He asked, eyeing the house dubiously. Absolutely certain. He didn't look convinced, but he tipped his hat. Good luck to you, then. And to the little one. Alara pressed payment into his hand, more than the fare, all the coins she could spare. Thank you, for everything. He nodded, climbed back up, and the coach rattled away. Alara watched it go, her last connection to the world she'd left. Then she turned toward Thornfield Rise. The door swung open before she could knock. A woman stood there, 60-ish, tall and angular, gray hair pulled back severely. She wore a wool dress that had seen better years and ink stains on her fingers. Her eyes were sharp and assessing behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "You must be Alara," she said. "You look half frozen. Come in before you turn into a statue." This was Margot Vance, had to be. Alara stepped inside. The entrance hall was chaos. Books stacked on every surface, papers scattered across a table. Strange mechanical devices she couldn't identify. It smelled like old paper and wood smoke and something sharp she couldn't place. Ink, maybe. "I apologize for the mess," Margot said, not sounding apologetic at all. "I don't entertain much. Well, ever. You'll have to navigate around the work." "I don't mind." Margot studied her, that sharp gaze taking in everything. The worn traveling dress, the careful posture, the shadows under Alara's eyes. "You're pregnant." Not a question, a statement. Alara froze. "How did you—" "You're holding yourself differently than in your letter's tone. Protective. Also, you left your husband rather than tell him he's about to have an heir, which suggests you found pregnancy at precisely the wrong time for his purposes and precisely the right time for your escape." Margot smiled, thin and knowing. "Am I close?" "Disturbingly. Good. I prefer accurate assessments to polite lies." She gestured toward the interior. "Come. I'll show you your rooms. We'll talk after you've rested. You look like you've been traveling through a war zone." Felt like it. Alara followed Margot through the house. It was bigger inside than it looked. Corridors branching in unexpected directions, rooms filled with books and manuscripts, and more of those strange devices. Through one doorway, she glimpsed a printing press. Through another, what looked like a chemistry laboratory. "What exactly do you do here?" Alara asked. "Restore damaged manuscripts. Preserve knowledge that would otherwise be lost. Occasionally publish works that London scholars are too cowardly to touch." Margot climbed a narrow staircase. "I've carved out a small empire of intellectual freedom in this nowhere place. It's not much, but it's mine." They reached a second-floor corridor. Margot opened a door onto a suite of rooms. Bedroom, sitting area, small study. Simple furniture, clean lines, everything functional. The windows overlooked wild gardens and hills beyond. "This is yours for as long as you need it," Margot said. "No rent, no expectations. Your family, even if we barely know each other." Alara's throat tightened. "I can work. I won't just be a burden." "Who said anything about burden?" Margot's expression softened slightly. "Child, you've just survived leaving a marriage most women would have endured until death. That takes more strength than you probably realize. If you want to work, we'll find work. If you need to rest, rest. But you're not a burden. You're a person who needs shelter." "I have shelter to spare. The mathematics are simple." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to Alara in 3 years, maybe longer. "Thank you," she whispered. Margot nodded briskly. "Dinner's at 7. Nothing formal. I eat at my desk half the time anyway. There's a washroom at the end of the hall. Settle in. We'll talk properly tomorrow." She left, closing the door quietly. Alara stood alone in her new rooms, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture in an unfamiliar house, carrying a secret child in her body and no clear idea of what came next. She should have felt lost, terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. She walked to the window, pressed her hand against the cold glass. Outside, winter was settling over the countryside, making everything stark and clear. No more careful gardens, no more measured spaces, just wild land and distant hills, and a sky that went on forever. Somewhere behind her, south and increasingly distant, was Iron Ridge Manor. Cedric. The life she'd left. But here, now, in this strange house with her strange aunt and a future that was entirely undefined, here she could breathe. Here she could begin again. Alara rested her hand on her abdomen, feeling nothing yet but knowing it was there. The secret, the reason, the tiny, impossible thing that had given her the courage to walk away. "All right," she whispered to the child and to herself and to whatever came next. "Let's see what we're made of." Outside, the first snow began to fall. The first night at Thornfield Rise, Alara didn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to unfamiliar sounds. Wind rattling windows that didn't fit quite right. Floorboards creaking in empty hallways. The distant hoot of an owl. The mattress was lumpy in places, soft in others. Nothing like the precisely calibrated comfort of Iron Ridge Manor. She liked it better. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and wrapped herself in a blanket, moving to the window seat. Snow was still falling, thick and steady now, erasing the landscape. In London, snow meant inconvenience, disrupted schedules, ruined hems, servants complaining. Here it felt different, purposeful, almost, like the world was wiping itself clean. Her hand drifted to her abdomen again. She'd developed the habit on the journey north, this constant checking, as if she could confirm through touch alone that the pregnancy was still viable, that she hadn't lost it during the coach accident or the freezing walk to the shepherd's shelter. Can't sleep either? Alara startled. Margot stood in the doorway, holding an oil lamp and looking entirely unsurprised to find her niece awake at this hour. I didn't mean to disturb you, Alara said. You didn't. I keep odd hours. Margot entered without invitation, settling into the room's other chair with the ease of someone comfortable in her own space. First night in a new place is always brutal. Your mind won't settle because it's still cataloging threats. I'm not sure I'm cataloging threats. Then your cataloging changes. Same principle. Margot studied her in the lamplight. You want to talk about it? About what? Whatever has you sitting in the dark at 3 in the morning. Alara pulled the blanket tighter. I don't know where to start. The beginning works, or the end. I'm not particular about narrative structure. Despite herself, Alara smiled. There was something refreshing about Margot's bluntness. No careful dancing around subjects, no coded language. Just direct questions expecting direct answers. He didn't want me, Alara said quietly. My husband. From the beginning, I was just a function. Something required for the estate's continuity. When I didn't provide that function quickly enough, he disposed of me. And you didn't tell him about the pregnancy? No. Why not? Alara had asked herself this question 100 times during the journey north. The answer kept changing, or maybe it had always been layered, too complex for a single explanation. Because telling him would have trapped me in a different way, she said finally. He would have kept me, but only as a vessel. I'd have been managed, watched, reduced to my biology. And after the child came, she trailed off. You'd have been discarded again, Margot finished, just more slowly. Yes, Margot nodded, unsurprised. So instead you chose to control the terms of your own exit. Smart. Costly, but smart. I don't feel smart. I feel reckless. Same thing sometimes. The difference is whether it works out. Margot leaned forward slightly. What do you need, Alara? From me, from this place. Be specific. The question was so direct it took Alara a moment to process. What did she need? Safety, obviously. Shelter. But beyond that? I need to be useful, she said. You said you had work here. I want to do it. I can't just exist. I'll go mad. Can you read Latin? Some. My education was patchy. Greek? No. Mathematics? Basic. Margot tapped her fingers against the chair, arm, calculating. Can you follow detailed instructions without improvising? Yes. Can you work with your hands? Steady work, precise work, hours at a time? I think so. I've never really tried. Good. People who say they're certain usually overestimate themselves. Margot stood. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we'll see if you have the patience for manuscript restoration. Most people don't. It's meticulous work, boring as hell until suddenly it isn't. But it pays, and I'm always behind schedule. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Whatever you ran from, the husband, the marriage, all of it, it's going to follow you in your head for a while. You'll second-guess yourself. Wonder if you made the right choice. That's normal. But don't let it paralyze you. The decision's made. Now you live with it and build something new. How do you know I'll second-guess myself? Margot smiled, thin and knowing, because everyone does, even the ones who pretend they don't. She left, taking the lamplight with her. Alara sat in the dark for a while longer, turning Margot's words over in her mind. Then she returned to bed and, surprisingly, slept. When she woke, pale winter sunlight was filtering through the windows. The snow had stopped, and downstairs she could hear the sounds of a household beginning its day. Footsteps, voices, the clatter of dishes. Not the organized efficiency of Iron Ridge Manor, but something looser, more organic. She dressed simply. No lady's maid here. No one to lace her into complicated gowns. Just wool and cotton, practical layers. Her reflection in the small mirror looked strange. Same face, but somehow different. Less careful, maybe. Less performed. Downstairs, she found chaos. The dining room, if it could be called that, was less a room for eating and more a repository for ongoing projects. Books covered most of the table. Papers spilled across chairs. What appeared to be a partially disassembled clock sat next to a plate of toast. Margot stood at a sideboard, pouring tea with one hand while reading a letter with the other. She glanced up when Alara entered. There's porridge, bread, eggs if you want them, though you'll have to navigate around the Flemish Psalter to reach the stove. The what? 15th century religious manuscript. Water damage. I'm trying to separate the pages without destroying them. Margot gestured vaguely toward the stove, where indeed a large, ancient-looking book lay open on a cloth. Just work around it. Alara picked her way across the room, found the eggs, cooked them carefully while trying not to breathe too heavily on the medieval manuscript. The absurdity of it struck her. A week ago, she'd been eating breakfast in a formal dining hall with servants and silver. Now she was frying eggs next to priceless historical artifacts. She liked this better, too. You're smiling, Margot observed. Why? I'm not sure. Good. Unselfconscious happiness is rare. Don't examine it too closely or it'll disappear. They ate standing up, plates balanced on the least cluttered sections of table. The porridge was lumpy. The tea was too strong. Alara had never enjoyed a meal more. Right, Margot said, setting her plate aside. Let's see if you can do this work. She led Alara through the house to a room Alara hadn't seen the previous day. A long, narrow space with tall windows along one wall. Work tables ran the length of the room, covered with tools Alara didn't recognize. Magnifying lenses, tiny brushes, bottles of solutions in various colors. And everywhere, books and manuscripts in various states of decay. This is the restoration studio, Margot said. Everything in here is damaged in some way. Water, fire, time, incompetent previous owners. My job, our job if you prove capable, is to stabilize them, make them readable again. Sometimes we can fully restore them. Sometimes we just stop the deterioration and preserve what's left. She picked up a manuscript from the nearest table, a slim volume with a cracked leather binding and pages stained dark brown at the edges. Water damage? Probably from a flood. 18th century, relatively recent. Someone's personal journal. Not historically significant, but the family wants it preserved. She handed it to Alara. Look at page 12. Alara opened it carefully. The pages were stiff, stuck together in places. She found page 12, or what was left of it. The ink had run, turning the text into illegible smears. Can this be saved? She asked. Some of it, not all. Watch. Margot took the book to one of the work tables, positioned it under a magnifying lens, and began working with tools Alara couldn't name. Slowly, impossibly, she started teasing apart fibers that had fused together, separating layers so thin they were nearly transparent. Under her hands, a few words began to emerge from the smears. Not much. A name, part of a date, but something. It's like surgery, Alara breathed. Exactly like surgery, except the patient is already dead and you're trying to preserve the corpse's last message. Margot straightened. It requires patience, steady hands, the ability to work for hours without visible progress. And you have to care about the outcome because if you don't care, you'll get sloppy, and sloppy work destroys what you're trying to save. I want to try. Margot assessed her. All right, but we start simple. See that stack? She pointed to a pile of loose pages in the corner. Those are from a 19th century botanical journal, pages separated from the binding, edges torn, some staining. Your job is to clean them without removing the original ink. I'll show you once. After that, you're on your own. She demonstrated with a single page how to assess the type of staining, mix the appropriate cleaning solution, apply it with controlled precision, blot rather than rub, work from the edges toward the center. It looked simple. It wasn't. Alara's first attempt was a disaster. She used too much solution, and the ink began to run. Margot caught it before permanent damage occurred, but barely. Lighter touch, Margot said. The paper is already fragile. You're not scrubbing a floor. The second attempt was better. The third, better still. By the 10th page, Alara had found a rhythm. Mix solution, test on the edge, apply carefully, blot, assess, repeat. Her back ached from bending over the work table. Her eyes strained from the close work. Her hands cramped. She'd never felt more engaged in her life. "You're not terrible at this," Margot said around midday, inspecting Alara's work. "High praise. It is, actually. Most people I try to train give up after an hour. You've been at it for 4 without complaining." Alara looked at the stack she'd cleaned. Maybe 30 pages. The original pile had been over 100. "This is going to take forever." "Yes, that's the work. Slow, meticulous, endless. But look." Margot held up one of the cleaned pages to the light. The botanical illustration was clearly visible now, delicate pen and ink drawings of plants Alara didn't recognize. Someone drew this. Someone else labeled it, studied it, cared about preserving this knowledge. It survived 200 years only to be damaged by some careless owner who probably stored it in a damp basement. Now you're giving it another chance at survival. That matters. Does it? Alara heard herself ask. Really? In the grand scheme of things, does one obscure botanical journal matter? "I don't know about grand schemes," Margot said. "I know about this journal, this page, this piece of knowledge that would be lost without intervention. Multiply that by every book in this room, every manuscript I've restored over 40 years. It adds up to something. Maybe not something world-changing, but something real." Alara returned to work, thinking about this. Thinking about preservation and loss, and the small acts that stood between history and oblivion. It was different from anything she'd done at Iron Ridge Manor, where every action had been measured against social expectations, where nothing felt real because everything was performance. This was real. The paper under her hands, the slow emergence of text from stains, the ache in her shoulders, real and difficult and strangely satisfying. They worked until the light began to fail. Margot lit lamps, but the delicate restoration work required natural light, so they stopped. Alara's clean pages were stacked neatly on a drying rack. Not a huge accomplishment, but visible progress. "You'll do," Margot said, which Alara was learning was the closest thing to effusive praise her aunt offered. That night, Alara slept deeply and didn't wake until dawn. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Wake early. Simple breakfast surrounded by books and projects. Hours in the restoration studio, learning new techniques, building skills that had no application in the world she'd left, but felt essential here. Meals were irregular, grabbed whenever hunger struck. Conversations with Margot ranged from manuscript chemistry to philosophy to scathing critiques of London's intellectual establishment. Alara's pregnancy progressed quietly. The morning sickness came and went, manageable. Her body changed in small ways she documented privately. Slight thickening of her waist, tenderness in her breasts, a heaviness in her limbs by evening. Nothing visible yet to an outside observer, but she felt different, inhabited. She wondered sometimes if she should feel more conflicted about the baby. Shouldn't she be mourning the loss of connection to Cedric? Shouldn't the child's existence trouble her more? But when she examined her feelings honestly, what she found was mostly practical concern mixed with cautious hope. This baby would complicate everything, but it would also be hers, fully, completely hers in a way nothing in her marriage had been. "You're getting better at this," Margot said one afternoon, watching Alara restore a fire-damaged manuscript. The work was intricate, separating charred pages without crumbling them, preserving what text remained. "You've got the patience for it. I like that it has rules," Alara said. "If you do X correctly, Y happens. No politics. No interpretation." "Oh, there's interpretation. Wait until you start deciphering damaged text. You'll be making judgment calls about what letters used to be based on context and probability. Very little certainty in this work." "Still more certainty than marriage," Margot laughed, sharp and genuine. "Can't argue that." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Margot said, casually, "Letter came for you today. From London." Alara's hand stilled. "How would anyone in London know I'm here?" "They probably didn't. It's addressed to me, asking about you. From someone named..." Margot consulted a paper in her pocket. "Mrs. Helena Vance. Your mother, I assume?" Alara's chest tightened. She hadn't written to her mother, hadn't told her about the divorce, the pregnancy, the flight north. The guilt was a physical weight. What does she want? "To know if you're here and if you're safe. She's heard rumors about the marriage ending. Wants to help if she can." Margot handed over the letter. "You should write back. She sounds worried." Alara read her mother's careful handwriting, the barely concealed anxiety between the polite phrases. If Alara is with you, please assure me of her well-being. If she's not, and you know where she might have gone, I implore you to tell me. I only want to help." The thing was, her mother couldn't help. Helena Vance had no money, no power, no influence. She lived on the charity of distant relatives, her own marriage having ended in debt and early widowhood. Alara had married Cedric partly to secure her mother's future. A small allowance had been part of the marriage settlement. That allowance would end with the divorce. She'd made her mother's situation worse by leaving. "I don't know what to tell her," Alara said. "The truth usually works. The truth will terrify her." She's already terrified. At least the truth gives her something concrete to worry about instead of imagining the worst. Alara spent that evening composing a letter. She wrote and discarded 3 drafts before settling on something that felt honest without being cruel. Yes, she was safe. Yes, the marriage had ended. Yes, she was staying with Margot. No, she wasn't coming back to London. And yes, this part took the longest to write. She was pregnant and planning to raise the child here, away from society's scrutiny. She sealed it before she could reconsider, gave it to Margot to post. "She'll worry more now," Margot said. "I know. But at least she'll know." The reply came 10 days later. Her mother's handwriting was shakier, the words less careful. She was horrified, supportive, confused, and desperately wanted to see Alara. Could she visit? Or could Alara come to London, at least for a short while? Alara wrote back, "Not yet. Maybe after the baby came. Maybe never. She didn't know." The correspondence continued, awkward and painful. Her mother sent small amounts of money she couldn't afford to spare. Alara sent it back. They were stuck in a dance neither knew how to stop, her mother trying to help, Alara refusing help, both of them trapped by circumstances neither had chosen. Winter deepened. The work continued, and Alara felt herself changing in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Not just physically, though her body was undeniably different now, her pregnancy visible if you knew to look, but mentally. The careful, controlled woman who'd lived at Iron Ridge Manor was dissolving, replaced by someone rawer and less certain, but more real. She caught herself laughing at Margot's caustic observations, swearing when a restoration went wrong, working past exhaustion because she wanted to finish a particular manuscript, eating standing up, reading late into the night, forgetting to maintain proper posture or moderate her opinions. Small rebellions, small freedoms. And then, 6 weeks after her arrival at Thornfield Rise, everything got complicated. Margot came into the studio one morning carrying a letter, her expression unreadable. "This came," she said. "It's from Cedric." Alara's stomach dropped. "How does he know I'm here?" "He doesn't. It's addressed to me, asking if I know your whereabouts. Very polite. Very concerned." Margot's tone was acidic. "Apparently he's had a change of heart about the divorce. Wants to find you. Discuss matters of mutual importance." Alara took the letter, scanned it quickly. Cedric's handwriting was precise as always, the language formal but carrying an edge of urgency she'd never seen before. "I understand I may have acted hastily in dissolving my marriage to your niece. Circumstances have changed, and I wish to speak with her regarding our future. If you know her location, I would be grateful for any information you could provide. This matter is of significant importance to both our families." "What circumstances?" Alara said aloud. "What could possibly have changed?" Margot shrugged. "Maybe he found out about the pregnancy." "How?" "I didn't tell anyone. You didn't." "Of course not. But servants talk. Doctors make assumptions. If you were sick in the mornings before you left, if anyone noticed you'd stopped drinking wine at dinner, if your body changed in small ways." Margot ticked off possibilities. "Information leaks. It always does." Alara felt panic rising. "If he knows, he'll come here. He'll demand nothing. This is my house. He has no authority here. He's a lord. He has authority everywhere. He's a lord in the South. Here, he's just another arrogant man who thinks his title matters." Margot's voice hardened. "You want to see him?" "No." "Then we don't respond. Simple as that." But it wasn't simple. The letter had broken the fragile peace Alara had built. All day she worked poorly, distracted, making mistakes that ruined hours of effort. By evening, she gave up, too agitated to continue. She found Margot in the library, surrounded by account books. "He'll come anyway," Alara said. "If I don't respond, he'll come looking." "Possibly." "What do I do?" Margot set down her pen. "What do you want to do?" "I want him to leave me alone. I want to raise this child without him. I want. She stopped, frustrated by her inability to articulate the full scope of what she wanted. You want autonomy, Margot said. The right to make your own choices without his interference. Unfortunately, the law doesn't share your priorities. Legally, he has rights to the child. To you, even, if the divorce isn't finalized. It's not. He stopped the proceedings when he ended the marriage. Technically, we're still. Alara couldn't finish the sentence. Married, Margot finished, which gives him considerable power over your situation. Alara sank into a chair, the weight of it crushing. She'd thought leaving was the hard part. She'd been wrong. Leaving had been simple compared to staying gone. There might be another option, Margot said slowly. Not a good option, but an option. Tell me, you could negotiate. Not surrender, negotiate. Meet with him, make your terms clear, get his agreement in writing before the child is born. Establish the boundaries now, while you have leverage. What leverage? I have nothing. You have the child he wants. You have knowledge he doesn't, about your capabilities, your work here, your value beyond reproduction. And you have something else. Margot leaned forward. You have the willingness to disappear. If he pushes too hard, you can vanish. Change your name, move further north, go somewhere he'll never find you. It would be hard, maybe impossible with a baby. But the threat exists. That's leverage. Alara turned this over. It was risky. Talking to Cedric meant reopening a door she'd worked hard to close. But Margot was right. Running only worked if you could keep running forever. And with a child, forever wasn't an option. If I meet him, Alara said carefully, it's on my terms. Here, not in London, with you present. And he agrees to my conditions or I walk away. What conditions? Alara hadn't articulated them before, even to herself, but saying them aloud, they crystallized into something solid. I keep my work, I keep my independence. I raise the child here, in this environment, not at Iron Ridge Manor. He can be involved, I won't deny him that, but he doesn't control me. He doesn't dictate my life. If he wants a wife, he finds a real partnership, not ownership. Margot smiled, predatory and approving. Now you're thinking like someone who knows her worth. Will he agree? Probably not. Men like Cedric don't negotiate with women. They issue terms and expect compliance. She paused. But maybe he's desperate enough to try. And if he's not, well, then you know exactly where you stand. That night, Alara wrote a response to Cedric's letter. Not warm, not yielding, just factual. She was staying with her aunt. She was well. If he wished to discuss their situation, he could visit Thornfield Rise in 2 weeks' time. She would grant him one meeting. What happened after that depended entirely on what he brought to the conversation besides expectations. She posted it the next morning, then tried to return to normal. But normal was gone. The anxiety sat in her chest like a stone, growing heavier as the days passed. She worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Would he come? What would she say? Could she actually stand her ground, or would she crumble the moment he walked through the door? Margot watched her spiraling with the patience of someone who'd seen this before. You're catastrophizing, she said one evening. I'm preparing. You're imagining the worst possible outcomes and treating them as certainties. Not the same thing. What if he demands I return? What if he threatens legal action? What if you trust yourself to handle it when it happens? Margot interrupted. You've already survived leaving. You've built a life here. You're not the same woman who sat silently through 3 years of marriage. Give yourself some credit. Alara wanted to believe that, but the old patterns were hard to break. The instinct to defer, to smooth conflicts, to make herself smaller so others could be bigger. The 13th day after posting the letter, a response arrived. Cedric would come. He'd arrive in 3 days, alone, as she'd requested. Alara read the letter 3 times, looking for hidden meanings or threats, but it was straightforward, almost humble. He thanked her for agreeing to meet. He hoped they could find a resolution beneficial to both parties. Both parties. As if they were business partners, not estranged spouses. Maybe that was better. Maybe approaching this as a negotiation rather than a reconciliation would make it survivable. The night before Cedric's arrival, Alara couldn't sleep again. She sat in the restoration studio, surrounded by damaged manuscripts, and thought about what Margot had said. Preservation was about saving what mattered from decay. But what if the thing that needed preservation wasn't a book or a document? What if it was yourself, your autonomy, your sense of worth, the fragile new person you were becoming? How did you restore that? She didn't have an answer. But sitting there in the lamplight, hands stained with restoration chemicals, belly starting to swell with new life, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt ready to fight. When Cedric's carriage appeared on the horizon the next afternoon, Alara was standing at the window of Thornfield Rise, Margot beside her. She watched the horses struggle through half-frozen mud, watched the driver navigate the rough excuse for a road. This was nothing like the smooth approach to Iron Ridge Manor. This was difficult terrain, unwelcoming and hard. Good, she thought. Let him work for it. The carriage stopped, the door opened, and Lord Cedric Hale stepped out into the cold northern afternoon, looking around at Thornfield Rise with an expression Alara couldn't quite read. But it wasn't contempt, it wasn't dismissal. It looked impossibly like uncertainty. "Ready?" Margot asked quietly. Alara took a breath, placed her hand over her abdomen where the baby turned and shifted, a small secret rebellion against everything Cedric represented. "Ready," she said, and she went downstairs to rewrite the terms of her life. Cedric looked smaller than Alara remembered. Not physically. He was still tall, still carried himself with that aristocratic posture that came from generations of people who never had to question their place in the world. But something about him had diminished. Maybe it was the setting. At Iron Ridge Manor, he'd been part of the architecture, another precisely placed element in a carefully designed life. Here, standing in Thornfield Rise's cluttered entrance hall, he looked like a man who'd wandered into the wrong building. Alara descended the stairs slowly, using the time to catalog her own reactions. Her heart was racing, but not with fear. Something sharper. Anger, maybe. Or the anticipation of finally saying things that had been locked inside her for 3 years. Margot stood at the bottom of the stairs, positioned between Cedric and Alara like a human barricade. She hadn't moved since he'd entered, just watched him with the kind of assessment usually reserved for damaged manuscripts, noting flaws, calculating whether restoration was possible. "Lord Hale," Margot said. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement of his presence. "Miss Vance, thank you for allowing this meeting." Cedric's voice was careful, controlled, the voice he used for business negotiations. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult for you, Alara." Alara reached the bottom of the stairs. "I live here now. I don't take journeys." A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, but it was gone quickly. "Of course, I know what you meant." She moved past Margot into the sitting room, such as it was. Books covered most surfaces. A half-assembled astrolabe sat on the table. This wasn't a room designed for receiving guests. It was a room designed for thinking, for working, for being useful. Cedric followed, his eyes taking in the chaos with barely concealed bewilderment. She wondered what he saw. Disorder, probably. Lack of proper management. The kind of environment that confirmed all his assumptions about women without male supervision. "Please, sit," Alara said, gesturing to the least cluttered chair. He sat, careful not to disturb the papers stacked beside him. Margot took up position near the door, arms crossed, not leaving, making that very clear. "I appreciate you agreeing to see me," Cedric began. "I haven't agreed to anything beyond this conversation." "Fair enough." He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Good. Alara wanted him uncomfortable. Wanted him to feel even a fraction of what she'd felt during their marriage. The constant low-grade anxiety of never quite measuring up, never quite belonging. "I'll be direct," Cedric said. "I made a mistake. Ending our marriage was premature. I've reconsidered." "How wonderful for you." Alara's voice was flat. "Unfortunately, I haven't reconsidered. The marriage is over." The divorce was never finalized. Legally, I'm aware of the legal status. I'm not interested in its continuation. Cedric's jaw tightened. This wasn't going how he'd planned, clearly. He'd expected, gratitude? Relief? The dutiful wife returned to her senses, ready to resume her position? "There are practical considerations," he said, shifting tactics. "Your financial situation, for one. Your mother's allowance has been stopped, as per the terms of the dissolution. Without my support, I work now," Alara interrupted. "I earn my own money. It's not a fortune, but it's mine. My mother will have to make do with less, and that's my burden to carry, not yours to leverage." "You work." He said it like he was testing the word, uncertain of its meaning in this context. "Doing what?" "Manuscript restoration. I'm learning a trade." Cedric glanced at Margot, then back to Alara. "That's unusual." "Yes." "Is it enough to live on?" "With careful management. She didn't mention that Margot refused to take rent, that most of her earnings went into savings for after the baby came. Cedric didn't need to know the specifics. He just needed to know she wasn't dependent. He was quiet for a moment, recalculating. There's another matter. I've heard, that is, it's come to my attention. He stopped, frustrated by his own circumlocution. Are you pregnant, Ilara? There it was. The real reason he'd come. Ilara met his eyes directly. Yes. His expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to name. Is it mine? The question was so insulting that Margot actually laughed, sharp and humorless. Truly? You think she left your bed and immediately found another man? In winter? While fleeing an ended marriage? Have you met women, Lord Hale, or just collected them? Cedric flushed. I didn't mean I had to ask. No, Ilara said coldly. You didn't. But yes, the child is yours, conceived before you dissolved our marriage. If you'd bothered to have an actual conversation with me instead of issuing your dismissal over breakfast, you might have known sooner. Why didn't you tell me? His voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composure. I had the right to know. You had the right to nothing. Ilara stood, needing the height advantage. You ended our marriage. You called me unproductive. You made it very clear that my only value was biological, and when I failed to provide an heir on your schedule, you discarded me. Why would I tell you about a pregnancy that would have trapped me in that dynamic forever? Trapped. Cedric stood as well, and now they were facing each other across the cluttered table like opposing generals. I would have honored my commitment, kept you as my wife. As a vessel. As a function. Not as a person. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out harsh, louder than Ilara intended. You want to talk about fair? You had 3 years to see me as a person, Cedric. 3 years to have a real conversation, to ask what I thought about anything, to treat me as something other than decorative furniture that had disappointed you. You never did. Not once. I provided for you, gave you everything you needed, except a partnership, except respect, except basic human recognition. Ilara's hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding through her. I was invisible in that house. Do you know how many dinners we attended where you introduced me to people I'd met a dozen times before? Because you never bothered to remember who I'd met, what conversations I'd had. I was just my wife, not Ilara. Not a person with a mind or opinions or... She stopped, breathing hard. This wasn't the negotiation she'd planned. She was supposed to be controlled, strategic. Instead, she was unraveling. 3 years of silence finally rupturing. Margot stepped forward. Perhaps we should take a break. No. Ilara steadied herself, forced her voice lower. No, we're going to finish this now. Cedric was staring at her like she was a stranger. Maybe she was. The Ilara he'd known would never have raised her voice, would never have confronted him directly. That Ilara was gone. I came here, Cedric said carefully, because I want to do the right thing. I want to acknowledge my child, provide for both of you. On what terms? You return to Iron Ridge Manor. We resume the marriage. The child is raised as my heir, with all the advantages that position provides. And me? What do I get? He looked genuinely confused by the question. Security, status, everything you had before. Everything I hated before, you mean? Ilara shook her head. No, those aren't my terms. Then what are your terms? This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. Ilara took a breath, organized her thoughts into the careful structure she'd practiced. I stay here, she said. I continue my work. I raise the child in this environment, not at Iron Ridge Manor. You can visit. I won't keep you from your child. But you don't control my life. You don't dictate my choices. If we're going to have any relationship at all, it's as equals, not as lord and subordinate. Cedric's face went through several expressions before settling on disbelief. You can't seriously expect me to agree to that. I seriously expect you to consider it. It's unreasonable. The child belongs at Iron Ridge Manor, raised in proper society, educated according to... The child belongs with me, Ilara cut him off. I'm the one carrying it. I'm the one who'll birth it. I'll be the one raising it day to day. Your genetic contribution doesn't override my bodily autonomy. The law would disagree. Then let's test that. Ilara's voice hardened. Take me to court. Argue that a child should be removed from a competent, employed mother and given to a father who couldn't even remember his wife's face in a crowd. See how that plays with a magistrate. See how it looks in the society pages when Lord Cedric Hale drags his pregnant wife through legal proceedings. Cedric went very still. You'd destroy your own reputation to spite me? My reputation is already destroyed. I'm a divorced woman. Not quite divorced, but functionally so. Working for wages and living in the countryside. Society has already written me off. You're the one with something to lose. It was a bluff, mostly. Alara had no idea how a legal battle would actually play out, and the thought of her life being dissected in court made her stomach turn. But Cedric didn't know that. And she'd learned something important during her weeks at Thornfield Rise. People who'd never been challenged assumed they couldn't be beaten. I don't want a battle, Cedric said finally. I want my child. Then negotiate in good faith. These aren't negotiations. These are demands. Yes, Alara agreed. They are. Take them or leave them. Margot made a small approving sound from her position by the door. Cedric heard it, shot her a dark look, then returned his attention to Alara. You've changed, he said. Yes. I'm not sure I like it. I'm absolutely certain I don't care. Alara sat back down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her hollowed out. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. After that, I'm done discussing this. One day isn't enough time to... One day is generous. You ended our marriage in under 6 minutes. I'm giving you significantly more consideration than you gave me. Cedric opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since entering Thornfield Rise, he looked genuinely lost. Where am I supposed to stay? There's an inn about 5 miles south, Margot offered. The Crooked Bell. Basic accommodations, but the beds are clean and the food won't kill you. 5 miles? In this weather? The coach that brought you here can take you there. Margot's smile was sharp. Unless you'd prefer to walk. Build character. Cedric looked between them. 2 women who'd somehow allied against him, who refused to bend to his expectations, who were calmly dismantling the power structure he'd assumed was permanent. Alara could see him struggling with it, could almost track his thoughts. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. Women didn't make demands. Wives didn't dictate terms. Pregnant women especially didn't refuse security and status. But here she was, doing exactly that. Tomorrow morning, Cedric said finally. I'll have an answer then. Good. He left without further conversation, collecting his coat and hat from where Margot had stacked them on a chair. The front door closed behind him with less force than Alara expected. She'd thought he might slam it, make some gesture of displaced anger. Instead, it was almost gentle, uncertain. Margot waited until the coach had pulled away before speaking. Well, that was illuminating. Alara was shaking now, the delayed reaction finally hitting. Was I too harsh? Harsh? You were surgical, precise. You laid out your requirements clearly and didn't waver. Margot came and sat beside her. How do you feel? Sick, terrified, like I might have just destroyed any chance of... She stopped. I don't even know what I destroyed a chance of. We didn't have anything real to begin with. You're right about that. But you might have something real now, if he's smart enough to recognize it. What if he's not? Then you raise your child here, continue your work, and build a life without him. You've already proven you can survive that. Margot paused. The question is, do you want to? Want him involved, I mean. Even on your terms. Alara pressed her hands against her abdomen, feeling the slight swell there. The baby was real now, undeniably present. In a few more weeks it would start moving, making its existence impossible to ignore. And Cedric was its father. That was just biology, just fact. But what it meant beyond biology, that was still undefined. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to tell him to disappear and never come back, but that's not fair to the child. And maybe, she hesitated, maybe not fair to him either. He's not evil, Margot, just limited, unimaginative. He's never had to think beyond his own perspective because no one ever made him. You're making him now, yes. But I don't know if people can actually change. If you spend your whole life being told you're entitled to deference, can you learn to see others as equals? Some can. Most don't. Margot stood, stretched. Either way, you did what you needed to do. Set your boundaries, defended your autonomy. The rest is up to him. That night, Alara couldn't eat. She tried. Margot made soup, insisted she needed the nutrition, but her stomach rejected everything. She ended up in the restoration studio again, the one place where her mind could quiet. She worked on a particularly damaged manuscript, a collection of letters from the 1600s, water-stained and brittle. Each letter required painstaking care to unfold without tearing. Inside were stories, love affairs, family disputes, business dealings, the ordinary drama of lives long finished. She wondered what letters people would read about her life, centuries from now. Would they see a woman who'd been brave or just reckless? A mother who'd protected her child, or a wife who'd destroyed her marriage out of spite? History was written by whoever survived to tell it. Maybe that was the real fight. Not winning, but surviving long enough to shape your own narrative. Around midnight, she heard a knock at the front door. Her heart jumped. Cedric, returning early? But it was too soon, and he'd said tomorrow morning. She heard Margot answer, heard low voices. Then footsteps on the stairs, moving toward the studio. Margot appeared in the doorway, her face unreadable. "Someone's here to see you." "Who?" "Your mother." Alara's hands went numb. The letter she was working on slipped, would have fallen if Margot hadn't caught it. "What?" "Helena Vance. She arrived by coach about 10 minutes ago. Says she had to see you, couldn't wait any longer. She's in quite a state." Alara stood, the room tilting slightly. Her mother. Here. Now. This was the last complication she needed. "Should I tell her you're indisposed?" Margot asked gently. Alara wanted to say yes. Wanted to hide in this room until morning, avoiding yet another confrontation. But that was the old Alara, the one who dodged difficult conversations, who made herself small to avoid discomfort. "No," she said. "I'll see her." Her mother was in the sitting room, perched on the edge of the same chair Cedric had occupied hours earlier. Helena Vance looked older than Alara remembered, lines deeper around her eyes, hair more gray than brown. She was wearing her traveling cloak, still damp from the evening mist, and her hands twisted together in her lap. When Alara entered, Helena stood so quickly she nearly knocked over the astrolabe. "Alara, oh my darling girl." She crossed the room and pulled Alara into an embrace that was too tight, too desperate. Alara stood rigid, unprepared for the physical contact, for the rush of conflicting emotions, relief and resentment, and a grief she hadn't known she'd been carrying. "Mother," she managed, "you didn't need to come." "Of course I did. Your letters, they were so sparse, so careful. I knew something was wrong." Helena pulled back, searching Alara's face. "Are you really pregnant?" "Yes." "And Cedric ended the marriage before he knew?" "Yes." Helena's expression crumpled. "Oh, Alara, what a mess. What a terrible mess." "It's not a mess. It's a choice." Alara stepped back, putting distance between them. "I'm managing." "Managing? You're living in—" Helena gestured vaguely at the cluttered room, the books and papers and mechanical devices. "This isn't a proper home for raising a child. You need stability, security, a father." "I need autonomy," Alara interrupted, "and I have it here. But at what cost? Your reputation is ruined, your future—" "My future is mine to build, not yours to manage, not Cedric's to dictate. Mine." Helena flinched like she'd been slapped. "I'm only trying to help." "By telling me I've made mistakes? By confirming that leaving my marriage was reckless and irresponsible?" "I didn't say that." "Say, you didn't have to." Alara heard the harshness in her own voice, couldn't quite soften it. "You're thinking it. That I should have stayed, should have told Cedric about the pregnancy, should have accepted whatever scraps of dignity he was willing to offer. That's what you did, isn't it? When father died and left debts, you accepted charity, accepted being managed by relatives who barely tolerated you. You made yourself small and grateful and hoped that would be enough." "What choice did I have?" Helena's voice rose, matching Alara's intensity. "I had no skills, no means of support, a daughter to raise. I did what I had to do to survive. And I'm doing what I have to do, differently. By throwing away security? By raising a child alone, in poverty? I'm not in poverty. I work. I earn. It's not wealth, but it's honest and it's mine." Alara's hands were shaking again. "Why can't you see that as strength instead of failure?" Helena was crying now, tears sliding down her face unchecked. "Because I'm terrified for you. Because the world is cruel to women without protection. Because I don't want you to suffer the way I've suffered." The admission hung between them. Alara felt something crack in her chest, anger giving way to a more complicated understanding. Her mother wasn't the enemy. She was just a woman who'd been ground down by circumstances, who'd learned to equate survival with submission. "I know you're scared," Alara said, more gently. I'm scared too, but I can't live the way you did. I tried. For 3 years I tried to be quiet and grateful and decorative, and it nearly destroyed me. She gestured at Thornfield Rise, at the life she was building. This is hard. It's uncertain, but it's real, and I'm real in it. I'm not performing anymore. Helena wiped her eyes, struggling for composure. I just want you to be safe. Safe isn't the same as free. Sometimes it has to be. Not for me. Not anymore. They stood in silence, the gap between them vast and unbridgeable. 2 generations of women, shaped by different defeats, unable to understand each other's choices. Margot appeared in the doorway, reading the tension immediately. Mrs. Vance, you've had a long journey. Let me show you to a room. You can rest, and we'll all think more clearly in the morning. Helena nodded, exhausted. She let Margot guide her out, but at the doorway she turned back. I do love you, she said, even when I don't understand you. I know, Alara replied. I love you too. After they'd gone, Alara sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. 2 confrontations in one day. 2 people she'd once relied on, now obstacles to navigate. She felt scraped raw, every defense stripped away. The baby moved, just a flutter, easy to miss, but definitely there. The first time she'd felt it, a small somersault inside her, a reminder that whatever happened with Cedric or her mother or anyone else, this was real. This life inside her, this consequence of choices made months ago. She was going to be a mother. That fact was approaching with the inevitability of winter, and she still had no idea if she was ready. But ready or not, it was coming. Morning arrived gray and cold. Alara woke to voices downstairs, her mother and Margot having what sounded like a tense but civil conversation. She dressed carefully, armor of wool and cotton, and went down to face whatever came next. Her mother was at the breakfast table, looking haggard but composed. Margot was reading correspondence, pointedly not mediating. Good morning, Alara said. Morning, darling. I hope you slept. Some. Alara poured tea, forced herself to eat bread even though her stomach protested. When does your coach return? This afternoon. I'm not staying long. I know I'm not wanted here. That's not... Alara stopped. Lying would help nothing. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated lately. Before Alara could respond, another knock sounded at the door. Margot rose to answer it, and moments later Cedric entered the breakfast room. He stopped when he saw Helena. Mrs. Vance, I didn't expect... Lord Hale. Helena's voice was cold. I could say the same. The 3 of them formed an awkward triangle. Cedric, Helena, Alara. 3 points of a disaster, Alara thought. 3 people connected by biology and law, and a marriage that had failed before it truly began. I've made my decision, Cedric said, addressing Alara, but glancing nervously at her mother. About your terms. Alara's heart hammered. And? I can't accept them, not as stated. He held up a hand before she could respond. But I have a counter-proposal, if you'll hear it. I'm listening. Cedric pulled a folded document from his coat. I had my solicitor draw this up last night. Took him most of the evening, but it's legal and binding. He handed it to Alara. Read it. She unfolded the document, scanned the dense legal language. It took her a moment to parse the meaning, but when she did, her breath caught. It was a contract, establishing terms of their continued marriage, but not as she'd known it. She would maintain residence at Thornfield Rise. Her work would be protected, her income her own. The child would be raised jointly. Cedric could visit, could be involved in decisions, but Alara retained primary custody. In exchange, the child would be acknowledged as Cedric's heir, with all legal rights that entailed. But there was more. Clauses about mutual respect, about decision-making requiring both parties' consent, about Alara's right to refuse relocation to Iron Ridge Manor. It was a marriage contract that actually acknowledged she was a person, not property. This is... Alara looked up, stunned. You actually did this. I stayed up most of the night thinking about what you said, about how I never saw you, never really looked. Cedric's voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. You were right. I treated you like furniture, like a role to be filled, and when you didn't fill it fast enough, I discarded you without ever considering that you might have value beyond reproduction. Helena made a small sound, surprise or disapproval, Alara couldn't tell. I can't promise I'll be good at this, Cedric continued. Partnership, equality, these aren't things I was raised to value in a marriage, but I'm willing to try. If you are. Alara read the contract again, looking for traps, for hidden clauses that would undermine everything. But it seemed genuine. More than that, it seemed fair. Why? She asked. Why agree to this? Cedric was quiet for a moment. Because losing you was the first thing that ever truly cost me something. And I want to understand why. I want to understand you, not own you, not control you, just know you, as you actually are. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly romantic, but it was honest, and it was more than he'd ever given her before. Alara looked at her mother, who was staring at the contract like it was written in a foreign language. What do you think? I think, Helena said slowly, that this is very unusual. That's not an answer. I think, Helena met Alara's eyes. I think if this is what you want, and it's in writing, then it's better than anything I ever managed to negotiate for myself. It was as close to approval as her mother could probably give. Alara turned to Margot, who'd been silently observing from the doorway. Your opinion? Margot came forward, held out her hand for the contract. She read it thoroughly, lips moving slightly as she parsed the legal language. Finally, she looked up. It's solid, legally binding. If he violates these terms, you can dissolve the marriage and retain custody. She handed it back. Whether you should sign it is a different question. What would you do? Alara asked. I'd never have married in the first place, so I'm not a reliable guide. But if I were you, if I had a child coming and wanted that child to have options, access, legitimacy without sacrificing my own autonomy, I'd consider it seriously. Margot paused. The question isn't whether the contract is fair. It is. The question is whether you trust him to honor it when it becomes inconvenient. Alara looked at Cedric. He stood very still, waiting for her judgment, and she realized this was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him. Not because he was asking for something. He'd asked for things before, demanded them, but because he was offering something. Control, partnership, the possibility of actual equality. Could she trust it? Could she trust him? Maybe not completely, but the contract gave her legal recourse if he failed, and more importantly, it gave her something she'd never had in their marriage, documented proof of her rights. I want one addition, Alara said. Name it. If the marriage becomes untenable, if we genuinely can't make this work, either party can dissolve it without penalty. No fighting for custody, no battles over property. We separate civilly and co-parent the child. Cedric's jaw tightened. You want an escape clause? I want a mutual escape clause. You get one too. If you decide this experiment in equality is too difficult, you can leave without being trapped. He considered this, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'll have it added. Alara took a pen from Margot's desk, made a note in the margin of the contract. Initial this. Agreeing to the amendment. Cedric initialed. Alara did the same. And just like that, she'd rewritten the terms of her marriage. Helena looked like she might faint. This is highly irregular. Yes, Alara agreed. It is. People will talk. Society already thinks I'm ruined. This changes nothing. Alara folded the contract carefully. I'll have my own solicitor review this before I sign the final version. But in principle, I accept. Cedric let out a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you. Don't thank me, just honor the agreement. I will. He hesitated, then added, May I ask you something? You can ask. When is the baby due? Late spring. April, the doctor thinks. And you're well? The pregnancy is progressing normally? It was the first time he'd asked about her health rather than the baby's status. The first time he'd treated her as a person experiencing pregnancy rather than a vessel containing his heir. I'm well, Alara said, and found she meant it. Tired, occasionally sick, but well, Cedric nodded. I'd like to be involved. Not immediately. I understand you need space, but as things progress, if that's acceptable. We'll discuss it, in writing, with clear boundaries. Of course. He left shortly after, promising to send the amended contract within a week. The room felt larger without him in it, less charged. Alara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. Helena was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. You just negotiated your own marriage contract. Yes. Women don't do that. This woman did. But Helena struggled for words. What if it doesn't work? What if he changes his mind, becomes cruel, decides he wants power back? Then I leave. I have it in writing that I can. Alara met her mother's eyes. I know this terrifies you. I know it's nothing like what you would have done, but it's what I need. The ability to choose. Even if the choice is hard, even if it's uncertain, I need to choose it. Helena was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Your father would have been proud of you. He always said you were braver than either of us. Alara's throat tightened. She barely remembered her father. He died when she was so young. But the idea that he might have understood, might have approved, meant more than she expected. I should get ready to leave, Helena said, standing. My coach will be here soon. Stay longer, a few more days. Let me show you what I do here. Helena hesitated, then shook her head. I don't think I can watch you build this life that's so different from mine. It makes me feel like I failed, like all my sacrifices were for nothing. They weren't for nothing. They kept us alive. That mattered. But you're choosing something else now. Yes? Because you kept me alive long enough to have choices. Alara stood, crossed to her mother. Thank you for that. Even if we don't understand each other, even if we can't agree on how to live, thank you for keeping me alive. Helena embraced her again, and this time Alara hugged back. They stood like that for a moment, two women from different generations, shaped by different worlds, trying to find connection across the gap. When Helena's coach arrived, Alara walked her out. The morning was bitter cold, frost coating everything. Her mother climbed into the coach, then leaned out the window. Write to me, she said. When the baby comes, I want to know. I will. And Alara, be careful. Contracts are just paper. They can be broken. I know, but they're better than nothing. The coach pulled away. Alara watched until it disappeared, then turned back to Thornfield Rise. Margot was standing in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. Hell of a morning, Margot observed. Hell of a life. You gonna be all right? Alara considered the question honestly. Was she all right? She'd just bound herself back to a marriage she'd fled, but on radically different terms. She was pregnant, unemployed before Margot had hired her, estranged from her mother in all the ways that mattered. She was building a life from scraps and stubbornness, with no guarantee any of it would work. But she was choosing it. Every piece, that had to count for something. Ask me again in 6 months, she said. Margot grinned. Fair enough. Come on, we've got manuscripts waiting. Turns out the dead are much more patient than the living. They went inside together, back to the restoration studio, back to the careful work of preserving what could be saved. And Alara felt the baby move again, that small flutter, that reminder of consequence and choice. Whatever came next, she'd face it, on her own terms, with her eyes open and her boundaries clear. She'd rewritten the contract of her life. Now she just had to live it. The amended contract arrived 6 days later, delivered by a nervous courier who looked relieved to hand it over and leave immediately. Alara read it 3 times, checking every clause, every addendum, making sure nothing had shifted in translation from their conversation to legal language. It was exactly as they'd agreed. Cedric had honored his word, at least on paper. She signed it in the restoration studio, Margot witnessing, her signature more decisive than it had been on the original marriage certificate 3 years ago. That signature had been hesitant, dutiful. This one was a claim. A choice. How do you feel? Margot asked, blotting the ink. Like I just agreed to something either very smart or catastrophically stupid. Alara set down the pen, flexed her cramped fingers. Time will tell which. Time tells everything eventually. Doesn't mean we have to like what it says. The winter deepened. Alara's pregnancy became undeniable, her body reshaping itself in ways that fascinated and terrified her. She'd expected to feel invaded somehow by the growing presence inside her. Instead, it felt more like collaboration. The baby would kick when she sat too long, settle when she moved, as if they were already negotiating, already learning each other's boundaries. Her work evolved too. Margot gave her increasingly complex manuscripts, trusting her with documents that required not just technical skill, but historical knowledge, intuition about what the original creator had intended. Alara found herself researching obscure topics, medieval binding techniques, 18th century ink formulations, the difference between water damage and wine stains. Knowledge for its own sake, not for social performance. It made her hungry in a way she'd never been hungry at Iron Ridge Manor, where learning had been ornamental, designed to make her more decorative, Cedric wrote weekly. Short letters, formal at first, asking about her health and the pregnancy's progression. Alara responded with equal formality, providing medical updates and nothing more. But slowly, over weeks, something shifted. His questions became more specific, less generic. Not just, how are you feeling, but did the nausea improve after you started eating smaller meals? Not just, is the baby well, but have you felt movement yet? What does it feel like? He was trying, awkwardly, with the gracelessness of someone learning a new language, but trying. Alara found herself responding with more detail, describing the strange sensation of the baby's hiccups, the way her back ached in new places, the odd food cravings that made no sense. Small intimacies, carefully rationed. She wasn't ready to trust him with everything, but these scraps felt safe. Biological facts, nothing that could be weaponized. In late February, Cedric asked if he could visit. Alara discussed it with Margot over dinner, a rabbit stew that Margot had somehow burned despite its 3-hour cook time. They ate it anyway, scraping char off the meat and pretending it was intentional. "Do you want to see him?" Margot asked. "I don't know, part of me does. Part of me thinks every interaction is a risk." Alara pushed a piece of blackened carrot around her plate. "What if seeing him here, in this space I've built, contaminates it? Makes it his too? Then you set boundaries. He visits the sitting room, not your private spaces. He stays for a few hours, not overnight. You control the terms." "I'm tired of controlling terms. I'm tired of every interaction being a negotiation." "Then don't see him." But Alara found she wanted to. Not because she missed him. She didn't, not really. But because the baby was real now, active and undeniable, and some part of her wanted to share that reality with the person who'd helped create it, even if that person was Cedric. She wrote back. He could come. One day. A few hours. No overnight stay. He arrived on a gray March afternoon, the kind of day where the sky pressed down like a weight. Alara watched from the window as his coach navigated the mud-rutted road, slower this time, more careful. When he stepped out, she noticed changes. He looked thinner, tired, like the winter had been hard on him too. She met him in the sitting room, which Margot had grudgingly cleared of most projects. A fire burned in the hearth. Tea sat ready. It looked almost civilized if you ignored the stack of German philosophical treatises occupying one corner. "Alara." Cedric's greeting was cautious. "You look pregnant?" "Well, I was going to say well, but yes, pregnant, very obviously pregnant." She was nearly 6 months along now, her belly pronounced enough that her dresses had to be altered. She'd stopped trying to hide it, stopped caring who noticed. Let them stare, let them whisper. Their judgment meant nothing here. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair. He sat. They both reached for the teapot at the same moment, hands nearly colliding. Alara pulled back. Cedric poured, his movement stiff, uncertain. This was excruciating. She'd forgotten how bad he was at anything that required spontaneity or genuine emotion. "How have you been?" she asked, defaulting to formality because at least formality had structure. "Busy. The estate requires constant attention. Without a wife to manage the household, everything's fallen to—" He stopped. "That sounds like I'm blaming you. I'm not. I'm just stating fact. Hire a housekeeper. Or learn to manage it yourself." "I've done both. It's still chaotic." He sipped his tea, made a face. "This is terrible." Despite herself, Alara smiled. Margot doesn't believe in wasting good tea on everyday consumption. This is what she calls adequate. "It tastes like dirt." "Yes, but it's hot dirt, so it serves its purpose." Cedric almost smiled. Almost. The moment passed quickly, but it had been there. A flash of something that wasn't duty or negotiation, just two people sharing a miserable cup of tea. "Can I—" He gestured vaguely toward her abdomen. "May I?" Alara understood what he was asking. "You want to feel the baby move?" If that's allowed. She considered refusing. This was intimate, vulnerable, exactly the kind of thing she'd been rationing, but he was the father, and the baby was kicking right now, an insistent pressure against her ribs. "All right, but carefully." Cedric moved to sit beside her on the settee. She took his hand, his fingers were cold despite the fire, and placed it against the side of her belly where the movement was strongest. They sat like that for a moment, waiting. Then the baby obliged with a solid kick right against Cedric's palm. His expression transformed. Shock, wonder, something that looked almost like fear. Is it supposed to be that strong?" "According to the midwife, yes. Apparently I'm carrying an active child." Another kick. Cedric's hand stayed where she'd placed it, feeling the movement, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Alara watched him process this, the abstract concept of an heir becoming a physical reality, a person with their own force and will. "It's real," he said quietly. It's been real for months, and I know. But knowing and feeling are different things. He looked at her, really looked, with more attention than he'd given her in their entire marriage. I'm sorry. For what? For not asking this before. For not caring about what it felt like for you, carrying this child. For treating the pregnancy as a status update rather than an experience you were living through. His hand was still on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. I'm sorry for all of it, Alara. The marriage, the dismissal, the years of not seeing you. I can't undo any of it, but I'm sorry. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and it broke something loose in her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something adjacent. The possibility that people could learn, could grow, even when they started from profound ignorance. Thank you, she said, for saying that. Does it change anything? I don't know yet. They sat for a while longer, his hand on her belly, the baby moving between them like a mediator. Eventually, Margot appeared in the doorway, assessing the scene with her usual sharp awareness. Lord Hale, staying for dinner, or are you smart enough to leave before you have to eat my cooking? Cedric pulled his hand back, properly embarrassed. I should leave. I've imposed enough. You're not wrong, Margot agreed cheerfully. But you're welcome to impose a bit longer if Alara doesn't mind. Alara found she didn't mind. Stay. But Margot's warning is genuine. Her cooking is experimental at best. I can handle experimental. Dinner was burned fish and overcooked vegetables and bread that Margot had bought from the village, which was the only edible component. They ate at the cluttered table, navigating around books and papers. The conversation stilted but less painful than Alara had expected. Cedric asked about her work. She explained manuscript restoration, showed him some of the pieces she'd completed. He seemed genuinely interested, asked intelligent questions, didn't condescend. You're good at this, he said, examining a page she'd restored from near illegibility. I'm learning to be good at it. There's a difference. Still, it's impressive. I had no idea you had this kind of skill. You never asked what skills I had. He absorbed the rebuke without deflecting. No, I didn't. I assumed you were decorative and left it at that. And now? Now I'm trying to see what I missed. It's humbling. After dinner, he left. But before he climbed into his coach, he turned back. May I visit again? In a few weeks? Alara considered. Yes. But write first. Don't just appear. I will. And Alara? Thank you for letting me be part of this. She watched him leave, the coach disappearing into the dusk. Margot joined her at the window. He's trying, Margot observed. Yes. Do you believe it? I'm trying to. Belief is harder than I expected. The visits continued. Every 2 or 3 weeks, Cedric would write, asking if he could come. Alara always said yes, though she couldn't fully articulate why. Maybe because the baby deserved a father who tried, even if he was learning how to try midstream. Maybe because she was curious to see if people could actually change, or if they just performed change convincingly. But something was shifting. Cedric brought books he thought she'd like. Some were terrible choices, proving he still didn't know her taste, but some were startlingly appropriate. He asked about her mother, remembered details from previous conversations. He stopped talking about Iron Ridge Manor as if it were the only viable reality, and started asking questions about Thornfield Rise, about Margot's work, about the surrounding countryside. Once in early April, he arrived to find Alara struggling with a particularly damaged manuscript, a medieval medical text with pages so brittle they threatened to disintegrate at touch. She was frustrated to the point of tears, exhausted from pregnancy and the meticulous work and the constant low-grade anxiety about whether any of this would work. What can I do? Cedric asked. Nothing. This is my work. I didn't ask if it was your work. I asked what I could do to help. She looked at him, startled. You could hold this magnifying glass steady while I separate these pages. My hands are shaking too much. He held the glass. Stood there for 2 hours while she worked, patient and silent, only speaking when she asked for a tool or needed him to adjust the angle. It was the most useful he'd ever been to her. Afterward, she said, Thank you. You don't have to thank me for basic support. Apparently I do, since it's the first time you've offered it. He absorbed that too, the quiet criticism, without deflecting or defending. I'm trying to be better. I know, it's strange. I don't know what to do with it. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out. The baby came 3 weeks later in late April, during a spring storm that turned the roads to rivers and trapped them all at Thornfield Rise. Alara's labor started at dawn, a cramping that built slowly, relentlessly, until it consumed everything. Margot sent for the midwife, a stern woman named Mrs. Blackwell, who delivered half the babies in the county and had no patience for dramatics. "First babies take time," Mrs. Blackwell announced after examining Alara. "Could be hours yet. Get comfortable." Comfortable was impossible. Alara paced the room, gripped furniture during contractions, tried positions the midwife suggested. Margot stayed close, offering water and cool cloths and a steady stream of caustic commentary about the absurdity of human reproduction. "If men had to do this," Margot said during one particularly brutal contraction, "society would have figured out a better system centuries ago." "Not helping," Alara gasped. "Wasn't trying to help, just stating facts." The pain was beyond anything Alara had imagined. Not sharp, more like being slowly torn apart from the inside, relentless and consuming. She'd thought she understood suffering during her marriage, during the isolation and dismissal. But this was different. This was biological, primal, undeniable. Somewhere around midday, she asked Margot to send for Cedric. "You sure?" Margot asked. "No, but do it anyway." A rider went out despite the storm. Hours passed. Alara lost track of time, everything blurring into cycles of pain and brief respite. Then Mrs. Blackwell was saying, "Almost there," and "Push now." And Alara was pushing, screaming, certain she was dying or had already died, and this was some kind of eternal punishment. And then, impossibly, there was a baby. Crying, furious, covered in blood and vernix. Mrs. Blackwell caught the infant, cleared its airway, held it up. "A boy," she announced. "Healthy lungs from the sound of it." Alara collapsed back, shaking, exhausted beyond comprehension. Mrs. Blackwell cleaned the baby efficiently, wrapped him in cloth, placed him on Alara's chest. He was impossibly small, impossibly real. His eyes were dark, unfocused. His hands curled into tiny fists. "Hello," Alara whispered. "Hello, you?" The baby stopped crying, turned toward her voice. Some instinct already working, already recognizing something familiar. Margot was crying, which was startling. Alara had never seen her aunt cry. "He's perfect. He's terrifying." That too. Mrs. Blackwell finished with the afterbirth, cleaned Alara up with brisk efficiency. "You did well. No tearing. Bleeding is normal. Rest now. The baby will want to feed soon." Alara had read about nursing, understood the mechanics intellectually. The reality was different. Awkward, painful, nothing like the serene images in books. The baby latched poorly, pulled away crying. Alara tried again, failed again, wanted to cry herself. "Patience," Mrs. Blackwell said. "You're both learning." On the fourth try, the baby latched properly. The sensation was strange, almost painful, but not quite. Alara looked down at this tiny person drawing sustenance from her body and felt a rush of emotion so intense it bordered on terror. This was hers. Completely, utterly hers. To protect, to raise, to inevitably fail in 1,000 ways. Cedric arrived 2 hours later, soaked from the storm, wild-eyed. He took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the room without knocking, then stopped. Alara was sitting up in bed, the baby asleep against her chest. She looked terrible, hair matted with sweat, exhausted beyond measure, wearing a nightdress stained with blood and other fluids. Nothing like the composed woman he'd been visiting. "You came," she said. "You asked me to." Cedric approached slowly, like he was afraid of disturbing something fragile. Are you both?" "We're fine, exhausted, terrified, but fine." "May I?" Alara nodded. Cedric sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looked at the baby with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Wonder, maybe, or fear, or both. "He's so small." "He's average size, according to Mrs. Blackwell. Nearly 8 pounds. "That's average. He looks like he could break." "I know. I'm afraid to move in case I hurt him." Cedric reached out, touched the baby's hand with one finger. The tiny fist curled around it reflexively, gripping. Cedric made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "What are you naming him?" he asked. Alara had thought about this for months, cycling through family names and historical figures and trying to find something that felt right. In the end, she'd chosen something simple. Rowan Hale. Rowan. Cedric tested the name. Why? Because Rowans are hardy. They grow in difficult conditions, survive where other trees can't. And because I wanted him to have a name that was mine to give, not inherited from your family or mine. Cedric absorbed this. It's a good name. Strong. They sat in silence, watching Rowan sleep. Outside, the storm continued, rain hammering windows, wind rattling shutters. But inside this room, there was a strange peace. Fragile, temporary, but real. I want to be a good father, Cedric said quietly. I don't know how. Mine wasn't particularly. But I want to try. Then start by being present. Not as a lord, not as someone fulfilling duty. Just as a person who cares about this child. I can do that. Can you? It's harder than it sounds. I know. But I'll try. He looked at her, this exhausted woman who'd just survived childbirth, who was holding his son, who'd rebuilt her entire life from nothing. You're extraordinary. I was a fool not to see it before. Alara was too tired for complex emotions. You were a product of your raising. So was I. We're both trying to be better than that now. Are we succeeding? Ask me in 20 years. Cedric stayed until Rowan woke hungry again, then left to give them privacy. But before he went, he stopped at the door. I meant what I said in the contract, about partnership, about equality. I know I've failed at it so far, but I'm going to keep trying, for both of you. Good, because the moment you stop trying, this arrangement ends. I understand. After he left, Margot returned carrying soup and bread. Eat, you need strength. Alara ate mechanically, one-handed, Rowan cradled in her other arm. The soup was actually edible. Margot must have begged it from someone in the village rather than attempting to cook. You did well, Margot said, both with the birth and with Cedric. I didn't do anything with Cedric except survive his presence. Exactly. You didn't crumble, didn't soften your boundaries, didn't let him take control just because you were vulnerable. That's victory. Margot sat beside the bed. He's changing, you know. Slowly, awkwardly, but changing. Do you believe it? I believe he's trying. Whether the trying sticks, that's the real question. But you've created conditions where he has to try. That's more than most women ever get. Alara looked at Rowan, this tiny person who'd already changed everything. I want him to grow up seeing what partnership actually looks like. Not performance. Not duty. Real collaboration between equals. Then you'll have to model it, both of you. Can two people who started wrong ever get it right? Margot smiled. Some of the best restorations I've ever done started with complete disasters. Pages burned beyond recognition, text obliterated by water. But with patience and the right techniques, you can recover something valuable. Sometimes better than the original, because the restoration adds new strength. We're not manuscripts. No, you're more complicated. But the principle holds, damage isn't permanent if you're willing to do the work. Over the following weeks, a rhythm established itself. Rowan was a demanding baby, hungry, constantly, sleeping in short bursts, crying for reasons Alara couldn't always decipher. She was exhausted in ways she hadn't known were possible, her body recovering from birth while simultaneously providing sustenance for another human. But there were moments when Rowan finally fell asleep on her chest, or when he looked at her with those unfocused, dark eyes, when she felt something fierce and protective and entirely new. Cedric visited weekly, always writing first, always respecting the boundaries she set. He was clumsy with Rowan at first, afraid of breaking him, but slowly grew more confident. He learned to hold the baby properly, to change nappies without gagging, to walk the room for hours when Rowan wouldn't settle. You're getting better at this, Alara observed one afternoon, watching Cedric rock a fussy Rowan. I'm terrified every moment that I'm doing it wrong. Welcome to parenthood. That's the baseline state. How do you manage it, the fear? I don't manage it. I just keep moving forward and hope I don't break him. She paused. But knowing you're scared too helps. Makes it feel less like personal failure and more like universal condition. Cedric looked at her over Rowan's head. We're actually doing this, aren't we? Co-parenting across separate households, rewriting every social expectation. Apparently. Do you think it's working? Alara considered honestly. It's not failing yet. That's the best I can offer. I'll take it. Word spread, of course. Society was small and gossip traveled fast. By early summer, everyone knew that Lady Alara Hale had given birth at her aunt's estate, that Lord Hale visited regularly, that their marriage continued under highly irregular terms. The scandal was delicious. A separated couple raising a child together, the wife working for wages, neither party conforming to expected behavior. Letters arrived from acquaintances Alara barely remembered, some expressing concern, others barely concealed judgment. She ignored most. But one letter stopped her cold. From Constance, Cedric's mother. Margot found her staring at it in the restoration studio, Rowan asleep in a basket beside her workbench. Bad news? I don't know yet. I'm afraid to open it. Want me to read it first? Screen for poison? Alara almost smiled. No, I should face it directly. She broke the seal, unfolded the heavy paper. Constance's handwriting was as precise as ever, every letter perfectly formed. The content, however, was surprising. Alara, I have heard about the birth of my grandson. I am writing to congratulate you, though I suspect my congratulations are neither wanted nor welcome. I will be frank. I did not approve of Cedric's decision to end your marriage. I thought it hasty and poorly considered. I said as much at the time, though he did not listen. Men rarely do, even when the advice comes from their mothers. I understand you are living apart, raising the child at your aunt's estate. This is unusual, but then much about your situation is unusual. I also understand that Cedric visits regularly and is attempting to be an involved father. This is more than his own father ever managed, so perhaps there is hope. I would like to meet the child. Not immediately. I understand you are still recovering and establishing routines. But when you feel ready, I would appreciate the opportunity to know my grandson. I am not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I am simply asking for a chance to be part of his life, on whatever terms you set. Regards, Lady Constance Hale. Alara read it twice, looking for hidden barbs or conditions. But it seemed genuine, stiff, formal, but genuine. She wants to meet Rowan, Alara told Margot. Do you want her to meet him? I don't know. She was cruel when I lived at Iron Ridge Manor. Not overtly, but in small ways. Constant assessment, constant judgment. People can change. Look at Cedric. Cedric is trying because I gave him no other option. Constance has no such pressure. Then make it a condition. She can meet Rowan, but only if she respects your boundaries and doesn't criticize your choices. Put it in writing if you have to. Alara considered this. I'm tired of everything being a negotiation. Then don't negotiate. Just tell her the terms and let her decide. That evening, Alara drafted a response. Yes, Constance could meet Rowan, but visits would be at Thornfield Rise on Alara's schedule. There would be no comments about the living arrangements, no suggestions about Alara's parenting, no criticism of her continued work. If Constance wanted a relationship with her grandson, it would be on Alara's terms. She posted it before she could reconsider. The response came within days. Constance agreed to all terms. She would visit in 2 weeks, if that was acceptable. When Constance arrived, Alara barely recognized her. Not physically, she still carried herself with that aristocratic precision, but something in her expression had softened, or maybe Alara had changed enough that she saw differently now. Thank you for allowing this, Constance said, settling into the sitting room. I'm allowing it for Rowan's sake, not yours. I understand. Constance accepted tea from Margot without comment about its terrible quality. May I see him? Alara brought Rowan out. He was awake, alert, 3 months old now, and starting to show personality. Constance's expression transformed when she saw him. Not quite the wonder Cedric had shown, but something close. Recognition, maybe. The continuation of family that she'd spent so long trying to secure. He has Cedric's eyes, Constance said quietly. And my stubbornness, according to the midwife. Then he's doomed to a difficult life. Stubbornness paired with aristocratic expectations. That's a war waiting to happen. It was the most honest thing Constance had ever said in Alara's presence. You didn't fight that war yourself. I fought it, lost it, learned to work within the constraints. Constance looked up from Rowan. But you didn't. You refused the constraints entirely. Built something new. I didn't think it was possible. It barely is. But you're succeeding. Against considerable odds, you're succeeding. Constance paused. I was wrong about you. I thought you were weak because you were quiet. I confused silence with submission. To be fair, I was submissive. For years. I just learned to stop. What changed? Alara thought about this. I ran out of space to shrink. Either I had to expand or disappear entirely, and I wasn't ready to disappear. Constance nodded slowly. I spent my whole life shrinking, making myself fit into smaller and smaller spaces. Watching you refuse to do the same, it's extraordinary. Infuriating, but extraordinary. You could still expand, it's not too late. For me, it is. I'm too old, too settled in my patterns, but Rowan, she looked at the baby again. He could grow up differently, not trapped by the same expectations. That's the plan. The visit was shorter than Alara expected, Constance leaving after an hour, but as she prepared to go, she turned back. I meant what I said in my letter. I want to be part of his life, on your terms. I know I can't undo the past, can't make up for the ways I failed you, but I can try to be better going forward. Then try, Alara said, but know that the moment you revert to criticism or control, these visits end. Understood. After Constance left, Margot appeared with 2 glasses of wine. Actual good wine, not the cheap stuff they usually drank. What are we celebrating? Alara asked. You've rewritten the entire power structure of an aristocratic family, forced multiple people to acknowledge your autonomy, and successfully established yourself as someone who can't be dismissed. That's worth celebrating. Alara sipped the wine, felt the warmth spread through her chest. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like constant vigilance. That's because it is. Vigilance is the price of autonomy. The moment you stop defending your boundaries, people start testing them. That sounds exhausting. It is. But the alternative, living small, accepting diminishment, that's exhausting too. At least this exhaustion has purpose. Alara looked at Rowan, asleep now in his basket. I want him to grow up not having to fight so hard for basic respect. Then you have to model it. Show him what it looks like to stand your ground, to require fair treatment, to walk away from arrangements that diminish you. Margot raised her glass. You're already doing that. Keep going. They drank to that, to persistence, to boundaries held, to small victories accumulating into something larger. That night, after Rowan's last feeding, Alara sat in the restoration studio and looked at the manuscripts she'd completed. Dozens of them now, each one saved from oblivion through patient, meticulous work. Preservation wasn't glamorous. It was slow, often invisible, easily overlooked. But without it, knowledge disappeared. History erased itself. She thought about her own history, the marriage that had failed, the life she'd rebuilt, the child sleeping upstairs who represented both consequence and possibility. All of it preserved through her refusal to disappear, her insistence on being seen. Cedric had changed because she'd required it. Constance was trying because Alara had made trying the only path to access. Even her mother, in her limited way, was beginning to understand that Alara's choices weren't rebellion, they were survival. The power hadn't shifted overnight. There had been no single dramatic moment of reversal. Instead, it had accumulated, conversation by conversation, boundary by boundary, small refusal by small refusal, until the balance tipped. Alara Vance had walked into Thornfield Rise with nothing but determination and a secret pregnancy. 6 months later, she had work that mattered, a child she was raising on her own terms, and a marriage restructured around her requirements rather than her husband's expectations. Not victory exactly, but not defeat either. Something new. Something she'd built herself, protected fiercely, and would defend for as long as necessary. She returned to bed, pulled Rowan's basket close, and fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, steady, strong, alive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new tests of the boundaries she'd established. But tonight, she had this: a child sleeping safely, work that fulfilled her, autonomy she'd fought for, and won. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. Rowan was 8 months old when Cedric asked the question that changed everything. They were in the restoration studio. Alara working on a particularly delicate 16th century atlas, while Rowan played on a blanket nearby, babbling to himself and grasping at wooden blocks Margot had carved. Cedric visited twice weekly now, the schedule so regular that even Rowan recognized his father's arrival with excited arm-waving. I've been thinking, Cedric said, watching Rowan attempt to stack blocks with more enthusiasm than skill. About Iron Ridge Manor. Alara's hand stilled on the manuscript. What about it? It's empty, functionally. I'm there, the staff is there, but it's not a home. It's just a building I happen to sleep in. He picked up one of Rowan's dropped blocks, handed it back. I want to change that. How? By making it more like this. He gestured at Thornfield Rise, the cluttered studio, the books everywhere, the sense of purpose beyond decoration. Not identical, but purposeful. A place where work happens, where learning happens, not just social performance. Alara set down her tools, turned to face him fully. What are you actually proposing? Cedric took a breath like he'd been rehearsing this. I want to establish a library at Iron Ridge Manor. A real one, not just a showpiece. Open to scholars, researchers, anyone doing serious work. I want to commission manuscript restorations, fund preservation projects. Create something that matters beyond the estate's profits. Why? Because watching you work, watching what you and Margot do here, has made me realize how hollow my life has been. Managing land, maximizing yields, attending dinners where people say nothing of consequence. I want to do something that outlasts me, something Rowan can be proud of. Alara studied him, looking for performance or manipulation, but his expression was open, vulnerable in the way he'd slowly learned to be over these months. That's ambitious, she said carefully. I know, and I can't do it alone. I don't have the knowledge or the expertise, he paused. I'm asking if you'd consider being involved. Not running it, you have your work here, but advising, helping design what it could be. You want me to help you build a library? I want us to build it together, as a partnership, the kind we should have had from the beginning. Rowan chose that moment to knock over his entire block tower, laughing at the destruction. Both parents turned to look at him, then back at each other. I need to think about it, Alara said. Of course, take all the time you need. But Alara found her mind returning to the idea constantly over the following days. A proper library, dedicated to preservation and scholarship. Not a vanity project, but a functioning resource. It was seductive, the possibility of scaling up her work, of creating something that could outlast them all. She discussed it with Margot over dinner, fish that was somehow both undercooked and burned, an achievement even by Margot's standards. Do you trust him? Margot asked, pushing aside the inedible portions. More than I did. Not completely, but more. That's honest, at least, Margot considered. The question isn't whether you trust him. It's whether you want to tie your professional reputation to his estate. Because if this library happens and carries your name, you're linked to him permanently. Not just as Rowan's mother, but as a colleague. Is that bad? Depends. Can you work with someone you were married to? Someone who hurt you, even if he's trying to make amends? Alara thought about this. I don't know, but I'm curious to find out. Curiosity is a decent starting place. Margot started clearing dishes. Whatever you decide, make sure the terms are clear. In writing. You're good at that now. Don't lose the skill just because he's being agreeable. The next time Cedric visited, Alara had conditions ready. I'll advise on the library project, she said without preamble. But I have requirements. Cedric pulled out a notebook. Tell me. First, my involvement is credited. Not as your wife, but as a manuscript restoration specialist in my own right. Second, I have final approval on any preservation methods used. Third, the library employs women. Not just as secretaries or cleaners, as researchers, catalogers, restorers. Fourth, wait. Cedric held up a hand. Employing women in professional roles will cause problems. The academic establishment won't like it. I know. That's why it's a requirement. He absorbed this, then smiled, an actual genuine smile. You're going to use my estate to revolutionize hiring practices. If we're building something new, we might as well build it correctly. Fair enough? What's the fourth condition? Margot gets consulted on major decisions. She has 40 years of experience. We use it. Cedric wrote this down. Anything else? Yes. If at any point this partnership becomes untenable, if we can't work together without destroying each other, we dissolve the professional relationship without destroying the personal one. Rowan doesn't suffer because his parents can't collaborate. Agreed. Cedric set down his pen. You know, most people would have demanded money, a salary, profit share, something. I want a salary. Fair wage for my expertise, but that's baseline, not a condition worth negotiating. You've become formidable. I've always been formidable. You just never noticed. The library project began slowly. Cedric hired architects to assess Iron Ridge Manor's East Wing. The section that had been Alara's prison was now being converted into workspace. Walls were knocked down, windows enlarged, proper ventilation installed. Alara visited for planning meetings, always day trips, never overnight. The house still made her anxious, but the anxiety had shifted. Less about her own diminishment, more about whether this ambitious project could actually work. She brought Rowan with her sometimes. He was walking now, unsteady but determined, babbling in proto-language that almost sounded meaningful. Watching him toddle through Iron Ridge Manor's grand halls, touching everything, disrupting the pristine order, gave Alara a fierce satisfaction. This house had tried to contain her. Now her son was claiming it as playground. The staff watched this transformation with barely concealed confusion. Lady Hale was back, but not living here. Working, but not as a wife. Bringing the heir, but not resuming her position. It broke every social script they knew. Mrs. Winters, the head housekeeper, finally asked Alara directly during one visit, "Forgive me, my lady, but what exactly is your situation now? With Lord Hale, I mean. The staff doesn't know how to address things." Alara considered her answer carefully. "Lord Hale and I have an unusual arrangement. We're married, but maintain separate residences. We're raising our son cooperatively, and now we're working together on this library project. I know it's confusing." "It's unprecedented, my lady." "Yes, but unprecedented doesn't mean wrong." Mrs. Winters digested this. "The younger staff think it's romantic, like a courtship happening in reverse. And the older staff think it's scandalous." Mrs. Winters permitted herself a small smile. "But scandals make life interesting, so we're not complaining." By Rowan's first birthday, the library's framework was complete. Shelving installed, climate control systems functioning, workspace areas defined. Now came the harder part, actually filling it with materials worth preserving and creating systems for their care. Alara recruited researchers from Margot's network, scholars who'd been denied positions elsewhere due to gender or unconventional backgrounds. The first hire was a woman named Dr. Catherine Webb, who'd published groundbreaking work on medieval medical texts but couldn't secure a university position because institutions didn't grant women such roles. "You're serious?" Dr. Webb asked during her interview at Thornfield Rise. "A permanent position, full research access, actual authority over preservation decisions?" "Completely serious," Alara confirmed. "We're building this from nothing, which means we can build it correctly. No inherited biases, no legacy restrictions." "And Lord Hale agrees to this?" "Lord Hale has learned to defer to expertise rather than assumptions, slowly, painfully, but he's learned." Dr. Webb laughed. "I've met the man. Watching him defer to anyone must be remarkable." "It is, but he's trying. That's more than most men in his position would do." They hired 5 researchers initially, 4 women, 1 man who'd been blacklisted for publishing controversial findings about religious texts. The academic establishment noticed. Letters arrived at Iron Ridge Manor, some congratulatory, most critical. How dare they undermine traditional standards? How dare they employ women in positions of authority? Cedric brought the letters to Alara, looking uncertain. "These are from people whose opinions matter," he said. "University chancellors, museum directors. They're threatening to withhold cooperation. Let them withhold it. We'll build our own networks." "That's not how institutional influence works." "Then we change how it works." Alara was working on a manuscript as they talked, her hands steady despite the conversation's tension. "You asked me to help build something that matters. Things that matter make people uncomfortable. If we're not getting criticized, we're not doing anything significant." Cedric watched her work for a moment. "How did you get so certain about this?" "I'm not certain. I'm terrified we're going to fail spectacularly, but I'm more afraid of not trying. You're braver than I'll ever be." "No, I'm just more desperate. Bravery implies choice. I don't have the luxury of playing it safe." The library opened formally in the spring, just after Rowan's second birthday. They didn't make it a grand social event. No aristocratic fanfare, no performative celebration. Instead, they invited working scholars, independent researchers, people who'd actually use the resources. The turnout was modest, maybe 40 people, but they came ready to work rather than socialize. Alara gave a short speech in the main reading room, Rowan balanced on her hip because he'd refused to be left with the nanny. "This library exists for preservation," she said, her voice carrying across the space. "Not just of manuscripts, but of knowledge that powerful institutions have deemed unworthy. We're creating space for work that matters, regardless of who does it or whether it fits conventional academic standards. If you've been told your research isn't valuable because of your gender, your background, or your conclusions, this is your space now. Use it well." The scholars applauded. Rowan chose that moment to grab at Alara's notes, crumpling them. She let him, because the speech was finished and the work was just beginning. Cedric found her later in one of the manuscript storage rooms, feeding Rowan while discussing preservation techniques with Dr. Webb. "That was a good speech," he said. "It was adequate," Alara corrected. "Rowan improved it by making it shorter." The scholars seem energized. They should be. This is the first time many of them have had access to proper resources. She shifted Rowan to her other hip. Are you having regrets about how unconventional this is? No, though my mother asked me yesterday if I'd lost my mind. What did you tell her? That I probably had, but the results were promising anyway. Constance had continued her visits to Thornfield Rise, becoming a surprisingly consistent presence in Rowan's life. She and Alara had developed a wary respect, not quite friendship, but something functional. Constance was teaching Rowan aristocratic manners, while Margot taught him to question authority. And somehow Rowan was integrating both influences without apparent confusion. Your mother is more adaptable than I expected, Alara said. She's learning, slowly, like I am. Cedric watched Rowan grab at his mother's hair, giggling when she made an exaggerated expression of pain. Do you think we're doing this right? The co-parenting, the separate residences, all of it? I think we're doing it honestly, which is different from doing it right. But honesty is all we've got. Over the following months, the library became something neither of them had fully anticipated, a hub for scholars who'd been marginalized elsewhere. Researchers came from across the country, bringing projects that universities had rejected, seeking access to texts and colleagues who took their work seriously. The manuscript restoration workshop that Alara supervised became particularly sought after, training a new generation in techniques that few institutions taught. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought scrutiny. The crisis came in late summer when a prominent academic journal published a scathing editorial about Iron Ridge Library's radical hiring practices and degradation of scholarly standards. The author, a university chancellor named Lord Pemberton, argued that employing women in research positions undermined the integrity of academic work and that Lord Hale was damaging his own reputation by allowing such practices. The article created exactly the scandal Pemberton intended. Other journals picked up the story. Society gossip turned vicious. Cedric received letters from peers suggesting he was being manipulated by his unconventional wife, that he needed to reassert proper control. Alara found him in the library one evening, staring at a particularly brutal letter from a family friend who'd known him since childhood. They're calling me weak, Cedric said, dominated by a woman, unable to maintain proper authority over my own estate. Are you? Alara asked bluntly. Am I what? Weak, dominated, unable to maintain authority. He looked at her, startled by the directness. No, I'm making conscious choices about what matters to me. Then their opinion is irrelevant. It's not that simple. These are people whose respect I've relied on my entire life. Their opinion shapes opportunities, influences business dealings, affects Rowan's future prospects. You're right. It's not simple. Alara sat across from him. But here's what I know. You can have their respect by conforming to expectations, or you can build something that actually matters. You can't have both. So choose. You make it sound easy. It's not easy. It's excruciating. I lost my mother's respect when I left you. I've lost the respect of everyone I knew in London society. But I gained something more valuable. My own respect. The ability to look at myself and not feel ashamed of compromises I made to avoid criticism. Cedric was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to respond to Pemberton's editorial. Publicly. Defending our hiring practices and our approach. That will make things worse before they get better. I know, but I'm tired of silence being mistaken for agreement. Alara felt something shift in her chest, surprise, maybe, or cautious hope. This was the most defiant she'd ever seen him. Not petulant defiance, but principled, choosing values over comfort. Then respond, she said. But do it thoughtfully. Make the argument about merit and results, not about me or gender politics. Show that our scholars are producing valuable work, that our preservation methods are sound. Win on substance, not rhetoric. Cedric drafted the response over the next week, consulting with Alara and Margot, refining the argument until it was precise and devastating. He laid out the library's achievements, manuscripts saved that other institutions had written off as unsalvageable, research published that advanced understanding of historical periods, techniques developed that improved preservation standards. Then he addressed the hiring practices directly. Talent and dedication mattered, gender didn't. Anyone arguing otherwise was defending mediocrity over excellence. The response was published in 3 major journals simultaneously. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the academic establishment denounced Cedric as a traitor to his class. The other half, mostly younger scholars, women, and reformers, rallied behind him. Debates erupted in journals, newspapers, even Parliament. What had started as an attack on one library became a referendum on who deserved access to knowledge and authority. Elara watched this unfold with a mixture of pride and terror. They'd wanted to create something significant. They'd succeeded. Now they had to weather the consequences. The real test came when several aristocratic families pulled their funding pledges, hoping to financially strangle the library. Cedric called an emergency meeting in the library's main hall. Elara, Margot, Dr. Webb, and the other senior researchers. "We've lost approximately 40% of our projected funding," Cedric announced, "which means we have two options: scale back our ambitions significantly or find alternative funding sources." "There's a third option," Dr. Webb said. "We charge for our services, not for access to materials, that stays free for researchers, but for restoration work, consulting, authentication. We have expertise that wealthy collectors and institutions need. Make them pay for it." Elara looked at Cedric. "That's a significant shift in model. But it would make us self-sustaining," he said slowly, "not dependent on aristocratic whims or institutional approval. It would also mean more work for everyone here. Longer hours, higher pressure, commercial deadlines alongside research goals." "I'm willing," Dr. Webb said. The other researchers nodded agreement. Margot, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "I've been running a version of this model for decades at Thornfield Rise. It works, but it's grueling. You trade one kind of vulnerability, funding, for another kind, market demand. Both have costs." "What would you do?" Cedric asked her. "I'd take the self-sufficiency. Always. Answering to customers is easier than answering to patrons. Customers just want quality work. Patrons want control." They voted unanimously to restructure as a fee-for-service operation with research functions. It meant transforming the library's identity, developing client relationships, marketing services. Cedric threw himself into it with surprising aptitude. His years managing Iron Ridge Manor's business affairs translated well to running a scholarly enterprise. Elara took charge of quality control and training, ensuring that commercial work didn't compromise their preservation standards. She was relentless about this, refusing projects that demanded unethical shortcuts, firing one researcher who tried to rush a restoration to meet a deadline. "You're building a reputation for being difficult," Cedric warned her, after she'd turned down a lucrative but problematic contract. "Good. Difficult means standards. Difficult means people can't manipulate us with money. Difficult also means fewer clients. I'd rather have fewer clients and maintain integrity than compromise what we've built." She looked at him directly. "Are we partners in this, or are you going to override me when business pressures mount?" It was a test, and they both knew it. Cedric had the legal authority to override her decisions, but the question was whether he would use that authority or honor the partnership they'd built. "We're partners," he said finally. "Your expertise, your judgment, I'll defer to it even when I don't fully understand it." "Even when it costs us money?" Even then, Elara realized with some surprise that she believed him. Somewhere over these 2 years of negotiation and collaboration, Cedric had actually changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The library survived its funding crisis. More than survived, it thrived. Word spread about their restoration work, their research capabilities, their uncompromising standards. Clients came from across Europe, bringing damaged manuscripts and paying premium rates for quality preservation. The researchers published groundbreaking work. 3 of their staff were recruited by major universities, positions that would have been impossible before Iron Ridge Library legitimized their expertise. By Rowan's 3rd birthday, they weren't just financially stable, they were profitable. The celebration was small, held at Thornfield Rise, because Margot insisted she wouldn't travel to that monstrosity Cedric calls a manor. Rowan ran wild through the gardens, Constance chasing after him with surprising energy for a woman her age. The library staff mingled with Margot's scholarly network. Everyone slightly drunk on wine that was actually decent for once. Elara found Cedric standing apart, watching the chaos with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Regretting this yet?" she asked. "No. Just realizing how different everything is now. 3 years ago, I thought I knew what my life was supposed to look like. Elegant dinners, profitable estates, a decorative wife producing heirs. Neat, predictable, utterly hollow. And now? Now I have a library that runs at the edge of financial viability, scholars who argue with me constantly, a son who's being raised by committee, and a wife who lives 4 hours away and terrifies me regularly." He smiled. It's chaotic and exhausting, and nothing like what I imagined. But it's real. It matters. That's new. You terrify easily, Alara observed. I'm barely trying. That's what's terrifying, the idea of you actually trying. Rowan came barreling over, grass-stained and gleeful, demanding to be picked up. Cedric obliged, swinging him into the air. The boy shrieked with laughter, completely unself-conscious, utterly secure in his father's attention. Alara watched them together and felt something complicated in her chest. Not love. She and Cedric had never had that, probably never would. But something else. Partnership. Respect. The hard-won knowledge that they could build things together despite starting from opposite places. Later that evening, after most guests had left and Rowan had finally crashed from exhaustion, Alara and Cedric sat in Margot's library. The older woman had disappeared to bed, leaving them alone for the first time in months. I've been thinking, Cedric said, about our arrangement. Alara tensed. What about it? It works. Better than I ever imagined. But it's also complicated. 2 households, constant travel between them, Rowan spending time in both places. He paused. I'm not suggesting we change it, just acknowledging that it's difficult. Most worthwhile things are. I know, and I'm not complaining, just... He struggled for words. I want you to know I see the work you're doing. Maintaining boundaries, protecting your autonomy, building a life that's yours while still making space for me and Rowan. It's extraordinary. I don't tell you that enough. Alara was quiet for a moment. When you ended our marriage, I thought my life was over, that I'd failed at the one thing society valued me for. Instead, that failure freed me to become someone I actually respect, someone who does work that matters, who raises a child with intention, who doesn't shrink herself to fit other people's expectations. So I did you a favor by being an ass? Unintentionally, yes, though I'd have preferred learning those lessons without the humiliation. Cedric laughed, then sobered. I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I'll keep saying it. I'm sorry for not seeing you, for wasting 3 years treating you like furniture, for all of it. I know, and I've forgiven you, mostly. The rest is just residue I'm still processing. They sat in comfortable silence, the firelight casting shadows across Margot's cluttered shelves. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars visible through the window. Do you think Rowan will understand this? Cedric asked eventually. When he's older? The way we've structured things? I think he'll understand that people can work together without living together. That partnership doesn't require proximity. That his parents chose cooperation over convention. Alara considered. Whether he approves is a different question. I hope he does. Me too, but even if he doesn't, we're doing the best we can with the situation we created. That has to count for something. The years that followed brought more challenges, more adjustments, more moments where the whole experiment seemed ready to collapse. But it held. The library expanded, adding a second building for manuscript storage and a training program for young restorers. Alara's reputation grew. She was invited to consult on preservation projects across Europe, sometimes taking Rowan with her, sometimes leaving him with Cedric or Margot. Rowan thrived in his unconventional upbringing, growing into a curious child who asked relentless questions and showed no respect for social hierarchies. When Rowan was 5, he asked the question Alara had been dreading. Why don't you and father live together like other parents? They were at Iron Ridge Manor in what had once been the formal dining room and was now Rowan's playroom. Alara had been helping him build an elaborate block castle. She set down the block she'd been holding. Because your father and I work better as partners when we have our own spaces, she said carefully. We love you very much, and we both want to be part of your life, but we need to live separately to be the best parents we can be. Is it because you don't love him? It's because love isn't the only thing that matters in a relationship. Respect matters. Partnership matters. Being able to be yourself matters. Your father and I respect each other now, but we need distance to maintain that respect. Rowan considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. But you're still married. Yes, it's unusual, but yes. Tommy at the village school says his parents fight all the time because they live together. Maybe you and father are smart to live apart. Alara pulled him into a hug. Maybe we are. Or maybe we just found a solution that works for our particular situation. Every family is different. I like that we're different. Yeah? Yeah. It makes things more interesting. That conversation, more than any other, convinced Alara that they'd done something right. Rowan wasn't damaged by their unconventional arrangement. If anything, he was more thoughtful, more willing to question assumptions, more comfortable with complexity. The real vindication came years later, when Rowan was 12. The Iron Ridge Library was hosting a symposium on manuscript preservation techniques, attracting scholars from across Europe. Elara was presenting research on water damage restoration, work that had taken years to develop and had become the field's new standard. Cedric introduced her, and for the first time in public, he didn't introduce her as his wife. He introduced her as Dr. Elara Vance, leading expert in manuscript preservation, co-founder of Iron Ridge Library, whose work had revolutionized the field. The applause was long and genuine. Elara stepped to the podium, looked out at the scholars gathered, many of them women, many of them her former students, all of them there because she'd opened doors that had been previously locked. She thought about this woman she'd been at breakfast 13 years ago, sitting across from Cedric, accepting the end of their marriage without telling him about the pregnancy. That woman had been terrified and calculating, making the best decision she could with limited options. She'd become someone else, someone with authority earned, work recognized, autonomy defended. Not despite leaving her marriage, but because she'd left it. After the presentation, Rowan found her in the manuscript storage room where she'd retreated for some quiet. "That was brilliant, Mother. You understood about 3% of the technical content." "True, but I understood the important part. Everyone in that room respects you, not because you're father's wife or because of your title, because you're actually good at what you do." Elara pulled him close. He was getting tall now, already reaching her shoulder. Soon he'd tower over her. "Your father and I didn't start well. We made mistakes, hurt each other, wasted years. But we learned. We built something better than what we started with. Remember that. Relationships can be remade if both people are willing to do the work. You and Father are happy now?" Elara considered this honestly. "We're content. We respect each other. We've built something meaningful together. That's not the same as happy, but it's real. And real is better than any performance of happiness we could have maintained if we'd stayed in that first version of our marriage." That evening, the symposium held a formal dinner. Elara sat beside Cedric with Rowan on her other side and Margot next to him. Family, unconventional but solid. Constance had passed the previous winter, peacefully in her sleep, and Elara still felt the absence. The older woman had become improbably an ally in her final years. During dinner, a young scholar approached their table nervously. "Dr. Vance, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. I read your work 3 years ago when I was considering leaving academia because no institution would hire me. Your research proved that excellent work could come from outside traditional structures. It gave me hope." "Where are you working now?" Elara asked. "Here, actually. I was hired last year to lead the authentication division." "Then thank Dr. Webb, not me. She runs hiring. I have thanked her, but I wanted you to know that your work, not just the technical work, but the work of building this institution, it matters. You changed what's possible." After the scholar left, Cedric said quietly, "You did that, changed what's possible. We did that, together. You did the hard part. I just wrote checks and got out of your way." Getting out of the way was harder than you think. For you, at least. You had to unlearn a lifetime of assumptions. "Still learning, honestly?" Cedric looked at Rowan, who was explaining something to Margot with wild hand gestures. "But he's growing up in a different world than I did. One where women can have authority, where marriages can be partnerships, where success isn't measured by conformity. That's your doing." Elara shook her head. "That's our doing. You could have fought me on every change. Instead, you learned to support them. That matters more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the symposium dinner continue around them. Outside the windows, Iron Ridge Manor's grounds were lit by lanterns, the same grounds where Elara had once walked alone and invisible. Now those grounds held a library, a community of scholars, a place where knowledge was preserved and valued regardless of who created it. Margot leaned over. "You're both being insufferably sentimental. Stop it." "It's a milestone evening," Elara defended. "Sentimentality is allowed." "Fine, but keep it contained. I have a reputation for being difficult to maintain." Rowan laughed. "Great Aunt Margot, everyone already knows you're difficult. You've scared 3 visiting scholars this week alone." "Only 3? I'm losing my touch." Later, much later, after the symposium had ended and guests had departed, Elara stood alone in the library's main hall. This space had once been her prison, rooms where she'd been decorative and silent and slowly disappearing. Now it was something else, a place of work and purpose, filled with voices and ideas and the constant activity of preservation. She'd rewritten more than a marriage contract. She'd rewritten what her life could be. Cedric found her there, Rowan already asleep in one of the upstairs bedrooms. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That we did something impossible, built a partnership from the ruins of a failed marriage, created something that actually works. It's not perfect. No, but it's real. It's ours. And it's given Rowan something neither of us had, an example of what honest collaboration looks like." Cedric moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the library they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it? Agreeing to work with me instead of just cutting ties completely?" Alara thought about this honestly. Sometimes, when things are hard, when we're arguing about library policy or parenting decisions or whose turn it is to deal with Rowan's latest scheme. But mostly, no. This is better than anything I imagined that morning when you ended our marriage. I was an idiot, yes. But you learned. That's worth something. They stood together in the quiet library. Two people who'd started as strangers, become spouses, destroyed that relationship, and rebuilt something more honest from the wreckage. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sweeping romance, no happily ever after in the traditional sense. But there was partnership. Hard-won, carefully maintained, constantly negotiated. There was work that mattered, and a child being raised with intention. There was autonomy preserved and boundaries respected. There was a life Alara had built with her own hands, defended with her own voice, shaped by her own choices. That was worth more than any fairy tale. She turned away from the window, ready to check on Rowan one more time before making the journey back to Thornfield Rise tomorrow. But Cedric stopped her with a question. "Would you ever consider living here, at Iron Ridge Manor? Not as you did before, as an equal, with your work protected, your autonomy intact. A genuine partnership under one roof." Alara looked at him, surprised. "Are you asking me to move back? I'm asking if you'd consider it. Rowan's getting older. Splitting time between households is getting harder for him. And—" he hesitated. "I've gotten used to working with you. I'd like to do more of it." "That's not a romantic proposal." "No, it's a practical one, which seems more honest for us." Alara considered. The idea of returning to Iron Ridge Manor should have terrified her. But this wouldn't be a return. It would be a different arrangement entirely. Her work protected by contract, her authority established, her autonomy non-negotiable. "I'd need my own workspace, separate from yours." "Of course." "And Margot visits regularly. She's not negotiable." "I've learned that, forcefully. And if it doesn't work, if living under the same roof destroys what we've built, we can revert to separate households without destroying the partnership." Escape clause. Always. Alara took a breath. "Then, yes, I'll consider it. We'll try it for 6 months, evaluate honestly, and make adjustments as needed." Cedric smiled, that genuine smile he'd learned to give over these years of slow change. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. I just proposed a trial period with quantifiable metrics for success. How is that romantic?" "Because it's honest, and honesty is the only romance we've ever had." They made the move 6 months later, after extensive preparation and contract revisions and numerous conversations with Rowan about what it would mean. Thornfield Rise became Alara's retreat. She kept rooms there, visited regularly, went when she needed distance or quiet. But Iron Ridge Manor became home, transformed beyond recognition from the cold showpiece it had been. The East Wing was all library and manuscript restoration. The West Wing held living quarters, rearranged so Alara's workspace was separate from Cedric's, both of them having independence within shared space. Rowan's rooms were central, accessible to both parents equally. The formal dining room remained playroom. The gardens became study spaces where scholars worked surrounded by growing things. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments about boundaries and parenting and library policy. There were still days when Alara retreated to Thornfield Rise because being under the same roof as Cedric was overwhelming. There were still moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. His assumption of authority, her defensive retreat into silence. But they caught those moments now, called them out, addressed them before they calcified into permanent damage. And slowly, impossibly, they built something that worked. Not a traditional marriage, not a conventional partnership, but something uniquely theirs. Built on mutual respect rather than social expectation. Founded on honest collaboration rather than performed harmony. Years later, when Rowan was preparing to leave for university, He asked his mother a question. Do you love father? They were in her manuscript restoration studio, Alara teaching him a delicate gilding technique he'd wanted to learn. Her hand stayed steady on the gold leaf she was applying. That's complicated. That's not an answer. No, it's not. Alara set down her tools, turned to face him fully. I respect your father. I value our partnership. I'm grateful for the growth we've both achieved. Love, the romantic kind you're asking about, I don't think we ever had that. We built something different, something that works for us. But you stayed together. We rebuilt together. There's a difference. She paused. Your father and I proved that relationships can take multiple forms. That ending badly doesn't mean ending permanently. That two people who hurt each other can learn to work together if they're both willing to change. That's not a traditional love story, but it's our story. It's a good story. You think so? I think you're both happier now than you were when you were pretending everything was fine. I remember that. Before you left? Before the library? When you were just quiet all the time and father was always elsewhere. This is better. Alara pulled him into a hug. When did you get so wise? I've had good teachers, even if they figure things out backwards and take years to get there. That evening, Alara found Cedric in the library's reading room reviewing applications for their new fellowship program. He looked up when she entered. Rowan asked if I love you, she said without preamble. Cedric set down his papers. What did you tell him? That we built something different than love, something that works for us. Do you think that's true? Alara sat across from him, the question hanging between them. Did she love him? She respected him, collaborated with him, had built a life alongside him. But love? I think, she said slowly, that I love what we've built together. The library, the life we've given Rowan, the partnership we've created. Whether that constitutes loving you, I honestly don't know. Fair enough. Cedric was quiet for a moment. I love you, in case that matters. Alara stared at him, genuinely shocked. Since when? I don't know exactly. Somewhere between watching you rebuild your life from nothing and seeing you defend your principles against the entire academic establishment. Somewhere in the 1,000 small negotiations and boundary settings and moments where you refuse to back down even when it would have been easier. You're extraordinary, Alara. I was too blind to see it for years, but I see it now. That's unexpected. I know, and I don't expect you to reciprocate. Our arrangement works as it is. I just wanted you to know. Alara processed this revelation, trying to understand what she felt. Surprise, certainly. Gratitude, maybe. But love in return? She still wasn't sure she knew what that meant, or whether she was capable of it after everything they'd been through. I care about you, she said finally. I trust you, which is more significant than it sounds, given our history. I value our partnership more than I can articulate. Whether that's love or something else, I don't have words for it. That's enough. More than enough, honestly. Cedric smiled. We've never been traditional. Why start now? They sat together in the library they'd built. Two people who'd found their way to partnership through failure and reconstruction, who'd learned that happy endings could take forms no storybook would recognize. Outside, Rowan was in the gardens, reading by lamplight, the next generation growing up in a world his parents had fundamentally changed, not through grand gestures or dramatic rebellion, but through steady, persistent refusal to accept diminishment, through small choices accumulated into revolution. Alara looked at Cedric, this man who'd dismissed her and then learned to see her, who'd destroyed their marriage and then helped rebuild it into something better. Thank you, she said. For what? For being willing to change, for learning, for becoming someone I can actually work with. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility, for setting boundaries instead of just leaving, for teaching me what partnership actually means. They returned to their work, Cedric to fellowship applications, Alara to correspondence about a restoration project in France. But something had shifted, not dramatically, not perfectly, just another small adjustment in the ongoing negotiation of their lives. The library around them stood as proof that wreckage could be transformed, that damaged things could be preserved, restored, made valuable again. That failure wasn't permanent if you were willing to do the painstaking work of reconstruction. Alara had walked into Iron Ridge Manor 13 years ago as a bride who didn't know her own worth. She'd left it as a woman discovering autonomy. She'd returned as a partner with authority earned and respected. Not a fairy tale, just a life, honestly lived, built from broken pieces into something stronger than the original design. And that, she thought, was worth more than any happily ever after she could have imagined.